Good afternoon. I will call the Rocklin Unified School District Board of Education study session for Wednesday, April 7th, 2021 to order. Brenda, will you please call the roll?
Julie Hupp.
Here.
Rick Miller.
Here.
Rochelle Price.
Here.
Tiffany Sathoff.
Here.
Derek Counter.
Here. All right. Go for the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you please stand? We want to remind the public watching that this study session is being held pursuant to the procedures established in Executive Order N-2920 issued by California Governor Gavin Newsom on March 17th, 2020, in response to COVID-19. The public may view the study session through RUSD's YouTube channel, live stream, and provide public comment through the links on the RUSD website, as well as the board agenda under item 2.1. Per Board Bylaw 9323, and to allow the community the opportunity to participate in meetings and hear the board discussion, deliberations, and voting on items, verbal public comments during this virtual meeting will be limited to 10 people at approximately 3 minutes each and 30 minutes in total comments on one agenda item. Please note that all written public comments submitted will be read silently during the meeting by the board. Okay. This afternoon, our study session presentation and board discussion will be on mathematics, improvement, and learning loss. Welcome, Superintendent Stock.
Good afternoon, President Counter and trustees. Thank you for continuing leadership and support out in our schools. Yesterday, as we welcomed back for the first time since March of 2020, all of our students for a full school day in one of the first school districts in the region and state to do so. I am, like I know you are, extremely proud of the incredible hard work and innovative thinking by the over 1,200 employees of our district that has allowed us to navigate a global pandemic and, through the leadership of the board, put our district on a trajectory for post-COVID success. And I think the conversations that we're going to have tonight really demonstrate that we are so thankfully not talking about CDPH guidance, how to reopen schools, where should we cut the budget, but we're actually talking about hopefully very invigorating, exciting topics, which is how to improve achievement of our students and how to really address needs that our students have had. And in this, as you go through the presentation tonight and the conversation tonight, you'll see that there's some of these needs have actually been there for a while, but it took unfortunately, a global pandemic and the near collapse of our economy for us to get the infusion of funding that we need to address these issues. And so the exciting part is we really get to do some things that I think many of us have thought about, wanted to do, try out things in this time, and that's a real positive, exciting place to be. And so just the board charged me and the district with implementing a multi-year strategy to improve math achievement in our district in a way that provides for ongoing growth, not just a one-year blip of data improvement. Tonight we're going to talk about the foundation that we're planning to lay for that initial work with you. We'll be talking about some of the data, our kind of current context, and then talk about how we move forward. And a goal is to use collaboration and use the improvement science tools and methods to help us in this work. So very excited about this conversation, and again, appreciate the board's direction. And you'll see as the system begins to align to work towards this. Our second topic will be addressing learning loss and other needs of our students due to the pandemic. And as the board's aware, this is being funded by an infusion of one-time funds from the state and federal government. It is, as I've mentioned, we are very excited about this. The board hopefully will see tonight an intentional weaving together of the math improvement work as we talk about how we want to deal with learning loss. The idea being that, one, that's a need that's been demonstrated, but more important, we'll be leveraging the work so that we can really amplify and accelerate where we're hoping to go. So hopefully you'll see that through line. And then in this work, we are going to be doing more next year than we can sustain over time because the funding's one time. That's just an unfortunate reality. But what we're hoping to do is to learn things that we want to keep and hold on to, things we may target for student groups, things we may modify, or things we abandon and say, that didn't work. And so, but we also are very hope that this amplifies the work we want to do as we go through this. So we really want to approach this in a way that we're asking questions, we're learning through it, versus just taking actions. And so what I would say is this is a beginning conversation around this work. There are a lot of unknowns. For example, all these funds that we have, we don't know a lot about them. Exactly what are the strings, what aren't the strings? As far as looking at the loss of learning and social emotional pieces, we're still working on assessing. So there's a lot of pieces that are in flux. However, summer school starts in 2 months. August 11th is 4 months away, which is the beginning of the school year. So even though we are in the unfortunate position of not having all the information, we have to make decisions. And that's a very hard place to be. But so you'll hear our initial thinking. Things that are closer, we're more certain on. Things that are further out are a little bit more opaque as we learn and are willing to adjust as we go forward. So tonight we've allocated approximately 90 minutes for each topic, starting with math improvement and then learning loss. We've put in segments and questions, but really the best things about our study sessions is the board guides it through their dialogue and questions, and so we'll adjust throughout that. And I need to just say a big thank you to our Ed Services team. So if you think about the smooth reopening full-time we had yesterday in our schools, a lot of work, a lot of planning, navigation went into it, led by Ed Services, especially Bill and Marty, who were appointed almost a year ago to their new positions and have done an outstanding job. And yet we're pivoting less than 24 hours or just 24 hours later to have a deep, in-depth conversation that, frankly, a lot of work and thinking has gone into over the last month and 6 weeks or so. So simultaneously doing that. And I think it's a real tribute to, even though we've had a much leaner district office Ed Services team, the fact that we're simultaneously in the same 24-hour, 48-hour period doing both. So I just want to acknowledge that. And Marty and Bill will be taking us through the study session tonight. And of course, Stacy Barsdale, our special education director, is here as well, because we know our students with disabilities also will play a role if there's questions from the board. And the rest of cabinet is available if we need them. Some of them will be working with us in closed session as well, too. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marty and Bill.
All right, good afternoon. I know Bill and I are excited to be here because this is actually some of the work we were hired to do. And this is really, we see this as an opportunity. We always want to improve, and Bill will go over that improvement science, but focus on math and learning loss. But this was really an opportunity for all of our students to gain from this. With that, just the goals and objectives of this workshop is to share the content and initial planning for improving all students, specifically in math. We'll define our learning loss and how that applies to our USD students resulting from COVID-19 pandemic, and share thinking of how we look forward to moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And then this is an opportunity to really just to share our thinking with you and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Marty, and good afternoon, trustees. I will reiterate that I'm actually very excited about this conversation because I get to talk about teaching and learning, which is why I went into this job, and it's better than a COVID update, so I'm looking forward to it. We do have a lot to share today. Just to orient you, you have the agenda. We're going to go over some data pretty quickly today. There is a deeper dive. The links on the right side of the actual agenda will take you into the actual data, and we're open to answering more questions about that, but we'll give you kind of the mile-high overview. And the other piece is there's a questions, thoughts link at the bottom of each section. That's when we're going to stop and talk. But if there's anything else that you think of that you want answered or we don't answer, feel free to jot it in there. We will also be writing in there, but we want to make sure we capture all your questions going forward. And with that, we will kick it off a little bit. You have not seen this graphic in a while, and I'm happy to resurrect it. We actually started the year with this graphic, focusing that what do we do, how do we do it, and why do we do it, with equity at the center. So as we look at the work for today, we're still focused on that equity, and this math improvement you'll hear today really gets at that. How do we provide educational excellence for all our students, and we know that students have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and we'll talk about how we're going to achieve equity in resolving that tonight. We are always committed to collaboration with all stakeholders in RUSD, and a lot of the information you'll hear tonight came from many stakeholders. To continuous improvement, we want to learn together, we want to grow together, and specifically today we're talking about math improvement and learning loss. What I love is that this graphic is actually still relevant. So we said before all the craziness, well, in the middle of all the craziness, we wanted to do math, we wanted to focus on tier 2, and today we're actually going to be talking about both of those things. So we're still targeting these goals. Some key questions we considered as we get into the first section, which is math improvement, is what do we know about math teaching and learning in Rocklin? Where are students succeeding in math, and where do they struggle? Where are those pain points for students where they may have trouble? Which students actually struggle the most? And what can we do to increase student learning in mathematics, particularly for those students who are struggling? So quickly, a current context, just to this, and this section is just to orient you kind of about some basics of math in our school district. Our curriculum adoptions are right there for you. We use a modified curriculum in TK. It's called Numbers Plus, but we also partially use some of the bridges. In K5, we use bridges in mathematics. 612 is that CPM, College Preparatory Mathematics. All of these were adopted in 16-17, so we're kind of midway through that adoption cycle, and one of the things we'll talk about today is where does that adoption of curriculum play into some of the math work we're going to do. It's normally 8 years, 7 to 8 years is what we look at. But it's variable, so we can kind of move sooner or later just depending on how we're feeling and where we're at.
And then when we say 7 to 8, is it 7 to 8 to be in the next one, or on year 7 you start talking about it, year 8 you make a selection, year 9 you go through the training and selection, and you know, like?
So typically when we're in the last year of an adoption, like year 7, we would do a year, it's a year-long selection and pilot process, and then we bring a recommendation to the board so we can approve and purchase for the following year. Does that make sense?
I will add, that's the goal, but as you'll see later on when we start talking about math, they're currently working on new frameworks. So we're still looking at maybe 2-3 years out, you know, so that'll put us right in line. But again, that's going to be, I think, 11 or 12 years in between.
So moving on to like the pathways, this is in TK6. So when we teach math in TK6, it really is grade-specific content standards. Interventions are provided largely by the classroom. Within the classroom, the teacher will pull small groups and differentiate. There's also this idea of focused learning time. You've heard about our academic rotation, so we do provide some limited intervention in math. We mostly do English language arts. We'll talk about that today. In terms of acceleration, same idea in elementary, very teacher specific. There's some club-based things after school like Math Olympiad, and then in 6th grade, you can actually test to be accelerated in middle school, but we don't currently have an accelerated path in elementary, except in our GATE program at Rocklin Elementary School, which is self-contained GATE, 2nd through 6th grade clusters of only GATE students, and that program is accelerated, just goes deeper with more depth in the content standards.
Very similar in 7 through 12, as many of you know. I believe you have students that have gone through. It's grade specific, however, we do have acceleration. That acceleration takes place in 7th grade. Kids can test in to take integrated 1. We also have a second accelerated point, so if you don't meet it in 7th grade, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to accelerate. In grade 10, we do have a combined integrated 2-3 class to where kids can go into that. That way they can still take that higher level math. So we have 2 acceleration points. As far as intervention, it is very teacher specific, and I'll talk more when we get into secondary about what the word intervention means in secondary. It's really focused on that essential learning. With that, we also have daily time built in for intervention during the school day at all of our secondary sites. You referred to as plus period or intervention time. We also have that built in at both middle schools as well. And then for our high school kids, we have summer school for that credit recovery to keep kids on track to graduate.
Can I ask some, this is probably a Bill question I should have asked earlier, but so we do have intervention curriculum for reading at the elementary level, for guided reading. We don't for math. Do Do you want to talk a little bit about why that is and what the thinking is around that?
So you're correct. We do have actually several reading intervention curriculums in elementary school, and we've been really focusing the last 2 years specifically on the Fontes and Pinnell level literacy intervention. And the reason we don't have a math intervention program specific to that subject is largely a capacity issue. So when we built these walk to learn models, we've blocked out about an hour a day for kids to participate. And largely we've been focused on, or almost wholly we've been focused on the English language arts portion of that and getting that to run. And the idea, how do we fit math into that, right? How do we add a separate, we can't really add another 50-minute block for math, so then teachers are forced to choose. And we're still trying to find a good way to do that. Or do you say, you test the students and you say, well, you know, reading's more important than math, or math's more important than reading. It's just that there's limited instructional minutes to do it. But really, I think that the reason is because we just haven't had the capacity in getting the math up, or the reading up and running, and we were going to do the math second.
I think that makes sense, and I totally get that. I think one thing I'm looking forward to exploring today and going forward is, you know, look, if I had to choose, I would probably choose literacy. I fully understand why we do that, and it makes sense. But I think the system's choice is showing in our results. Mm-hmm. And so how do we think about that going forward, and whether or not we think we're sending a message that actually is counterproductive by the way we do it? Sorry, did you want to? Okay.
I had a follow-up question along those same lines. For the plus period, is it left up to the student or the teacher? For example, if they had an ELA intervention need and a mathematic intervention need, which supersedes the other, and how is that decision made?
So it's based on the period of the day, so it might be a +2, so you're going to stay in for your second period. However, they do have passes to, if you need help in ELA, you can work that out with your teacher. The teacher that you're with during that plus period can send you to that class. It does get challenging, but I want to give a ton of credit to our teachers, because many of them meet before school, after school, at lunchtime. So they provide intervention throughout the day, not only during plus period, but we'll talk more about some of the additional interventions we want to move forward with.
Right. I think it would be interesting if we had data at some point, and maybe we already do, and you might be prepared to show it, of how many of our students that need that math intervention, are they also needing the ELA intervention, or is that a small number of students? Just a thought of a data point that could be helpful to look at.
That is very typical, and that's been some of the challenges we've had at our middle schools, because kids that need math also need language arts. So then there's a rotation, and in all honesty, middle schools have tried a variety of different things, whether it's every 3 weeks, whether we rotate every 9 weeks, 6 weeks. Throughout the years, we've tried a number of different things.
That's where disaggregation matters a lot, because it's not exactly the same with English language learners, right? So making sure that we're recognizing the individual needs and
Correct.
That's great.
Correct.
And Rick, you're exactly right. In elementary, we are choosing ELA over math, particularly in primary grades, because we do feel like there's a priority, but it does have an impact on math performance.
So to keep us moving forward, just our current content as far as the frameworks, and this is what I was referring to. Our frameworks that we're currently working off of came out in 2013. Really a focus on, greater focus on fewer topics, coherence in that thinking across grade levels, and then really the conceptual understanding, and that's the key piece that our teachers are focused on right now. Some of the new revised frameworks coming out, they're due to come out November of this year. They've printed off about, I think, 6 units have been printed. They're still in draft form. Additions that they're really focused on is that teaching of equity, as Bill mentioned earlier, engagement and social justice, the universal design for learning, and then progression and mathematical practices. So there are some key shifts to that. Work is just beginning. We participated with Roseville Joint, some of our secondary teachers, with Joe Bowler, who's one of the authors of this, professor from Stanford University. There's going to be some major shifts in that. It's going to be interesting. And again, it's projected to be out in November of 21. But again, you have to also understand, once that comes out, then our textbook companies have to adjust their books to this, so it doesn't mean that we will be adopting new curriculum in 21. We're not really looking to do that until 23, 24. Just some highlights we want to go over, and once again, I know I speak for Bill as well. Our elementary teachers, multiple subjects, put a ton of effort into math. In secondary, just a huge shout out to our teachers for what they've done. Our performance greatly exceeds state performances. However, when you look at that, 63% of our students meet or exceed those, and that's a great number. But if you look at the opposite of that, that means 37% of our kids do not meet those state standards. So even though we do great, and when you look at Placer County and how we score at state testing, we'll talk more later when we compare that to similar schools. We'll look at some of that data, and there's areas that we can grow on. That's why we're excited that math is going to be a focus, but it's also part of our learning loss plan as well. It's going to be interwoven. Is that the word you use, Superintendent Stock? Again, looking at this, at TK-12, it's kind of crested, and actually in some areas actually begin to fall slightly, but we'll show that. Percentages-wise, they go from grades through 11 through a 71% high down to a 55%. And then what it's really showing is some of that achievement gaps in math between white, Asian, Filipino students with our social economic disadvantage, our students with disabilities, homeless, EL African Americans, and Hispanic groups. With that, again, we'll show we're doing great in Placer County, but we're going to do some similar school comparisons that show that we actually have some low growth, and so all the more reason why we're moving forward with math work that we have to do.
I know Rick wants to talk about the data. I'm going to pause.
One thing I do, because when I was looking through the data before, and I appreciated it was great data and looking at MAP and standards across, this is my mind, but I think growth is always more important than status, and MAP does provide a growth model, so I'm curious why we don't include it, why we don't look at it, and can we start looking at growth? Because in many ways it means more to me than...
We actually do have some MAP growth data in this presentation to look
Okay,
at.
you
Yeah.
do?
We do,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, awesome.
Because I agree,
I
yeah.
don't think it was what was sent out, though, but great, awesome.
We've been
You've
refining
updated it?
literally
Okay, great.
every day
Awesome.
since we've sent that,
Perfect.
and that's why I
Awesome.
didn't
Love
post
it.
till a
Love
couple
it.
hours ago.
I'm excited.
Yeah, we had some folks off last week, so we snuck some things in on Monday and Tuesday. So- Okay, so just a deeper dive at this. So what Marty was talking about is this is district-wide data. This is for all students. And you can just see over a span of 5 years, our performance kind of it crests and then it starts to drop off a little bit. And you're gonna see this in a lot of data sets. It's like this cresting wave and we kind of level out and maybe we're starting to decline a little. And that's a concern because as was pointed out, 63% is great when the state's at 35%, but we're comparing ourselves to a higher standard where how can we meet the needs of those other 37% of kids, and I think we can in Rocklin. A look at across elementary schools, you'll see that similar kind of cresting piece, and this is again this is students meeting and exceeding standards over a 5-year period. You see a lot of growth across schools. You see some flatness. You see some schools who really stand out, but I will tell you that largely these meeting and exceeding on CAST scores really point to socioeconomic factors as well. So it's important to consider that. That's why when we talk about growth and we'll look at growth models, those give us a different picture of some of these high-performing schools and where we are in Rocklin. Because we have high-performing families and we have smart kids and smart parents, and that helps us. So we'll take a look at that. In terms of our go ahead, Marty, that's you.
Just once again, if you look at our secondary scores, where they're at, they've kind of plateaued. And again, as Bill mentioned, some of that has to do with our social economic demographics right there. Again, that's great when the state's at 35%, but it just shows that we have room for improvement, especially as we get down to our student groups. What are we doing there? And that's part of our learning loss plan that we'll cover at a later time.
And if you look at grade levels, same thing. So we're seeing just kind of a flat or a cresting wave of performance in mathematics, and we want to change the direction of that and get backwards in an upward trajectory.
Sorry, can I go back to the secondary?
Yep.
So these are hard conversations to have, Marty, and so I'm just going to ask it. And
Yeah.
And we're going to have hard conversations to be successful looking at this. So I think you're exactly right. The demographics matter, especially low SES is going to matter a lot. The difference between Rocklin and Whitney cannot be attributed simply to poverty.
Real.
And there's an extreme difference in proficiency in those two schools. What do we know about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's where when I said this is going to provide us an opportunity to really focus and look at it. There's been different pilots that have been tried out there at Whitney High School. That 18-19 score, we're not sure why that happened. I mean, that's a significant drop from 60 to 51. Why did that take place? The sites have worked on that, and I'll show you some data earlier, as we've talked about previously with no credits and some of those adjustments made, some of the support classes that they've tried out there.
Right.
They've tried some things thinking, is this going to work? They didn't work.
Yeah.
So we're constantly, in both schools, and that's the one thing I give credit, particularly to our math. When you think of PLCs, we think of that happening once on Monday afternoons. It happens every day. It happens after every class.
Yeah.
They work together with one another. What worked, when you build a lesson and you think this is going to be great, and it bombs, why is that? Is that because the teacher?
Right.
All right, and so I give credit because they're constantly trying to refine and get better.
Yeah. I mean, I could not agree more, and I know we're going to talk about improvement science, but the last thing we want to take away from this is don't stop trying new things and do it for sure. But specifically, when we look at a 15-point gap between schools, there's got to be learning there we can tease out and try to understand what's happening and how we, okay.
So the next slide actually looks at student groups. So we have English language learners, we have socioeconomic disadvantage, we have students with disabilities compared to all students. And sadly, I don't think any of us are surprised by what we see there. This is true in Rocklin, this is true in California, this is true across the United States. So there is an achievement gap. It's no different in Rocklin. It's very severe, as you can see, based on the student performance. And we are always interested in closing this and improving teaching and learning, or learning specifically for students in these groups. And we'll be talking about that today. So, can I get an amen over? Yes. So I did want to share. This is relatively new to Rocklin. I'll say that first of all. And now we've had 2 years without CAST. So we're looking at data from the core collaborative that goes back to 17-18 and 18-19. And this is what I was talking about that's very interesting, and I'm fascinated by this because this looks at growth. So it says, based on where you got the students, and they could be high performing, how did the students leave your school? Did they show low growth? Did they show average growth, or did they show a lot of growth? And this is compared to similar demographics and similar levels of achievement. So now you're looking at a school that is comparing apples to apples. So a good example here is, you might have noticed on the slide I showed before, Cobblestone isn't achieving our highest CAST scores of all our elementary schools. They're somewhere in the middle of our achievement. But if you look at their growth, they have, and the high area is 70 to 90. Average growth is like 30 to 70, and below 30 would be considered low growth. Cobblestone is showing, and you could do it as similar schools like the old model, like 7 out of 10. They're achieving like 70 out of 100 in terms of their growth. And last year they achieved, or the 18-19, they achieved 91 out of 100. So they're one of the top growth schools when compared to similar schools, which is pretty impressive. On the other side, if you look at Sunset Ranch, I'll pick on my former school, you'll notice that in 18-19, even though they're one of our top performing schools in terms of CASP scores, their growth was in a 38. So compared to other schools like Sunset Ranch, their growth was fairly low. So why is that, right? So we know we have great students who are high achieving, but we're not taking them from where they are and moving them, right? So this is an important thing to think about. Are we moving students the way we want to move students within our system?
So I guess based on that, from an elementary school, like, do you have a perspective? Do you have a hypothesis of what's going on?
Yeah, I have some hypotheses about that, and it depends, as you look at the different schools and what's happening, but all this is grist for that investigation we're going to talk about, because principals have seen this a little bit, but I don't even know that we've had the opportunity to have them delve into this and consider the why behind this, because to me it's an eye-opener for principals and teachers at a school to say, well, and I say this in the agenda, and I meant it for this section, this idea from Collins, right, that good is the enemy of great. We have a lot of high-performing schools, and sometimes it's like it's good enough. We're doing good look at our scores, we're doing great. My kids are passing, And then, but when you look at a similar school, they're maybe doing more for kids than we are. And it's getting past that attitude in a lot of cases, like, how do we go to great? You know, how do we make that move? I think it's interesting. The other school I was going to highlight, which is a fascinating one too, is Valley View. So Valley View is our highest performing school in our district in terms of strictly CAST scores, but you can see their growth is at 83, 82%. So they're also moving students. So it's not exclusive in terms of, it really depends on what the students are doing, what the teachers are doing. And Derek, there's no simple answer for that. I think there's a whole range of factors that affect that in terms of how well are teams looking, working together, what is the leadership focusing on, what kind of interventions and supports are in place. All those things come to play when I think we look at these numbers.
And then the other piece is, this is a grade span at a school versus you can delve into individual grades, individual areas to see, are there areas of growth? So that's, again, this kind of gets rid of, we often talk about, we're the best in the county, the state type of thing, and this really kind of says, okay, but given that relative piece, what is that growth? Because, again, we can learn from other schools and districts with like pieces to say, okay, you have a similar population. How do you do that? Like if you only have 4% EL kids, how do you move them when you aren't having huge groups and huge programs? Let's go find out. Or, so this really starts to push us to that continuous improvement versus just saying we're good enough. And we'll never really get to the equity piece unless we start looking at growth pieces like this.
I also do think there are learnings. So the Valley View part is great, in part because I think sometimes the Valley View teachers get dismissed. You're like, well, sure, you have the most easy kids to teach, and it turns out it's not true. Like, it's not true that they aren't moving these kids in significant ways. And I would say it's not like you spend time there. Like they are a very data-focused faculty. They use MAP rigidly and well, and has impact on how they're moving students along. Now, you can make an argument that we want to see more SEL, we don't want to purely be focused on, and I think that's a legitimate conversation to have, but nevertheless, there are learnings here that we can then look, and we can look at arugula, and it also allows us to sort of say, we're not just going to do everything forever, we're going to actually recognize, if I looked at just this data set, and there's more, but just this one, I'd say, arugula, we need to have a conversation, understand why that is, and this allows us then to focus, and I think that's positive.
The other piece is just kind of a simple color. Green is like high growth. Orange is in that average range of growth. If you see red, it means it's under the growth you should normally have. So we want to acknowledge that there is growth. It's just, is it at the level we want? So we don't want to be a takeaway that we aren't seeing some growth. It's just, is it at the level?
But in the same regard, if I'm green in one year, I should be green in the next year, right? And I get population changes, but in the same regard, teachers don't change that much. I mean, you don't have an onset of all teachers left and all new teachers at a school. So the programs and the people, the infrastructure should still be there.
I would say this will change dramatically.
No. What I'm saying year to year.
Well, but this actually is, the whole point of this to me is you're actually looking at the class you get. And as Julie will tell you, one class you get this year is very different than the class you get next year. And this holds for that, right? So then it says, how'd you do with those kids based on where they were? And you can expect them to change every year.
So with all that being said, moving on, looking at our schools, and like Superintendent Stock mentioned, Granite Oaks is one of the highest achieving around in Placer County. But when you look at this and look at that second year, 31, that's the low point of showing growth. You look at 30 in Springview in 2018-19, they're at 30. That means they're below growth. And so that's red. So why is that? Again, you only have 2 years in middle school. They're rotating 50% of your kids are new. But again, this is similar schools. So we have a tendency, as Bill mentioned, good is the enemy of great. Granite Oaks does some amazing stuff. But when we compare them outside of Placer County to similar schools, there are some questions that need to be answered there. And that's where taking this deep dive is going to give us those opportunities to look at that. And then just so you know, it's not available for 11th grade in this type of chart here. So that's why you don't see high school. Speaking of high school, and this is something that I shared with Rick earlier, I'm glad that we're focusing on math, and I just want to make sure that everyone sees this. So this is a 4-year comparison. So this is some of that work that I talked about before, that that they are looking at this and what's taking place and why are these numbers so great. I just highlighted a couple of them. If you look starting on the right and we'll go to the left, in 2017, integrated 1, 21% of those kids earned a no credit. Why is that? If you look down below, as far as the totals, you had 244 out of 1,944 kids earn no credits, 13%. To their credit, they're going in and they're looking at that. Why is this happening? What's occurring? Working across the way over, you look in 2018-19, math lab, and that's that everyday math that kids are in. So they earn a grade in integrated 2, say, but in math lab, that's based on, are they doing their homework? Are they doing all that stuff there? But still, when you see 21% of those kids are not being successful, again, it leads to those questions. You drop all the way down, though, of the totals of 2,126 kids, 11% of them earned a no credit. Again, working with those kids, why is that? And then all the way across, the one that stands out the most in 2019-20 is 52% of the kids in Math Lab 2. You could see is if you look at the number of kids participating in everyday math, it's really that freshman year. There's a number of kids in there, so they have extra sections supporting that. They don't have as many in integrated 2, and then in integrated 3, you only have 1 or 2 sections. Again, they're constantly going back, and what I appreciate about this is the math department sits down with the administration and they go over this. We go from 13% to 11 to 11 to 7%. Again, let me remind you this year, with the 4x, kids are taking a year and a semester. But even that 7%, that's great, all right, but what are we doing to support that? Because you can see in Math Lab, 40% of those kids didn't earn credit. With that, next, we have Rocklin High School, very similar.
Real quick, Marty, just on the data, if you go down the bottom in 17, 18, is it math total? So 244 is the kids that received no credit?
Correct.
1944 is the total kids that got credit?
Those are the total kids that were in math class
That
at
were
that
in
time.
math.
Yes.
Okay.
244 of them did not earn credit, and that's 13%.
And I get that we did a 4x4 in 2020, but any reason why less kids are taking math across the years at Whitney?
Because that's only half the kids. Okay.
No, I got it in 2020, 2021. I'm just saying is 19, 18, and 17, we go from 2,000 down to 1,700. Just
Yeah.
less kids are taking math?
I got to think about that for a second.
Well, because of the 4x4,
No,
you're
the
seeing
4x4 is 2020, 2021.
Yeah, you're talking 1920. I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to go back and look at that. Looking at Rocklin High School, very similar. As you go through, I just highlighted a couple of those, but again, working from the right to the left, you go from 9% to 10.8 to 5.97 to 11. Why is that? What's going on? The highlighted ones, 26% of kids in Math Lab 2, 24.6 in Integrated 1, and then in 1920, you had 20% of those kids. You have integrated math repeated there, and you can't see the course code, but it's 1400 and 1401. 1401 are the kids in everyday math. 1400 are kids just in Integrated 1 every other day. But again, they are asking these questions. Why are kids not being successful? What is it? They're constantly trying new things. And again, we will continue to do that by focusing on math, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Math is a challenge, as Bill mentioned, not only in Placer County, but throughout the nation. What's going on? We need to go out there and do a deep dive, although we've been very successful in many ways. Again, recall back, 37% of our kids aren't being successful. So again, this is an opportunity for us to do a human investment, to take a deep dive in why and what can we do to get these kids up to grade level.
Do you guys have any idea how many of our kids graduate not A through G ready or A through G ready in every class but their math requirement?
For example, last year, we had 12 kids, seniors, that stayed at Rocklin High School that literally went to the very last day to earn credit.
In math.
In math.
Yeah.
Math is the one.
Yep.
Again, what prevents us mainly is math and that world language.
Yeah.
We've made some adjustments. Again, as a senior, where 70% of them have that last block off, we actually have parents sign off, explaining to them that if they don't take that second year of world language, they will not be considered. So you choose, because we're not going to give your kid a block off,
Yeah.
because we want them to be college and career ready.
Yeah.
And even at that, we did have a handful of parents say that's okay.
But we didn't have it disaggregated by specifically the math, but we're about a 75% A through G completion rate of our senior classes at both comprehensive high schools, and that's been a plateau number. It goes between like 72, 75 the last several years. So that's again, the requirement to get into a CSU UC, that the basic course requirement is that A through G sequence. And so, again, means 25% of our students aren't. And if we think that, well, they're going to just go to community college, if you aren't on track in A through G when you hit community college, you could spend longer than 2 years there, which the more time you spend there, the less likely you are to achieve a diploma in that persistence rate. So we really want all of our students meeting that threshold, not just saying, well, significant numbers can go down to Sierra. And so that is an area of when we look at like that terminal piece of all the build, at the end of the piece, have they mastered integrated 3 to meet that A through G?
Okay, this is a pause point. We covered a bunch of data. Are there other questions or thoughts or feedback trustees have for us?
I guess more on the high school level, is it intentional that we offer different math classes at different high schools? Like I can see like there's AP Calc and there's stats in both, but then one has accounting, one doesn't.
We've built those out, so we do have accounting, we do have a business
There's
pathway.
variation, just it's planned variation, not because we don't have the right.
Just over the years, I would say, kids always have an opportunity. For example, AP Calculus BC, that's a tough class because do you have enough to run 3 sections, 2 sections? But kids always have the opportunity to go in between. And again, it's been built out over the years. But I don't have a good answer for you as far as why some are offered and others aren't, other than, like you mentioned, accounting. That is part of the business CTE pathway.
Gotcha,
and that's one.
I like at Whitney, we offer algebra, but at Rocklin, we don't offer algebra.
Well, and again, when you go back and look at that, in 2017, we were still finishing that up as we went to the new integrated model. Also, some of that is when you see the word basic in front, that's math for our special ed students.
Okay.
And again, some of it is what kids sign up for. Again, AP Stats is another one.
Okay, so,
I have a couple.
go ahead, sorry.
Just, So, so a couple thoughts. One is I do wonder about transitions and the impact that they have on our kids, especially in math. And data isn't too bad, but so CPM in particular, the hope was it would allow that transition to be smoother. And it's the advantage of a unified. Frankly, as I talk to teachers, both at elementary and middle, I hear very little articulation between the two. We have a curriculum that allows it, but we don't. And then also I think we get then lost into high school. So my first question is just generally thinking about those transitions. How do we think about that from a mathematics perspective? And what could we be doing better?
So I will say that over the years, we have created, for example, at Springview, we assigned a Springview teacher to one of our 6 feeder schools to go down and have that collaboration and that communication as far as what's working, what's not working. Many of our teachers at Springview went through the CPM training. One is actually a trainer, Natalie Imes, does some training. I don't know why we haven't continued that, other than it comes down to time, because it does require on a Monday when you're meeting with your department, and many of them are teaching 7th grade math and integrated 1, so you have kind of 2 things you're talking about to take time and go down. Could we create a schedule that's part of their either quarterly or every 5 weeks, 6 weeks? We could do that, and we have tried that. Why that hasn't been sustained, I I don't have a
And
good
it
answer.
does feel like this is probably a conversation we're going to have consistently about priorities and what matters. And so if it's not, then we get the results that we're getting. I also do wonder if the new world, if Zoom can help. Like if we can now do that so you don't have to actually literally drive there, and that could make a difference in your
Yeah.
ability to sort of engage more.
No, that's a great, getting all the sixth grade teachers together
Right.
and combining that PLC and having the discussions on those topics.
And especially, I think that the idea that building that camaraderie, so it's less, and I haven't heard that as much here, but less the feeling for the elementary kids, the elementary teachers of the middle school teachers coming in and telling us what to do, what we're not doing wrong, as opposed to actually truly collaborating and trying to build this together. And if we could figure that out, it could be huge, I think.
Agree, and I will say it's been more successful at some schools than others.
For sure.
You have that relationship.
Right.
And we have had years where the high school came down to the middle school, and the middle school went to the
course.
elementary and point the finger. But again, as a unified district, there's no reason why we can't get that and sustain that and keep that going.
Great. And then the other question I had is I just reflecting on the our ELs in like, the fact that in some instances ELs are performing below students with disabilities in mathematics is hugely concerning to me. So I'm not looking for an answer right now, but I'm absolutely looking for an answer as we continue down this path of very specifically for English language learners, how are we thinking about improvement?
Thank you.
I have a question. On slide 10, where it shows the growth and then how it peaks at 63.5 and then it starts to go down.
Yes.
When we were down at 57 and we came up to 61 and we were heading up to 63, what was happening then? What was the impetus for that growth in that period of time? Was it just because it was a new curriculum? Is that when the new adoption happened?
That is part of it, a new adoption and getting, takes a year or so to get used to that. CPM is a different style of teaching, although at our high schools, we've been using CPM for Rocklin High 27 years.
Oh, wow.
Middle schools, that was a new adoption.
The adoption year, I think, is actually 16, 17, so you see minimal impact
Right,
after the
it's
adoption.
before.
Doesn't make sense, right?
And I will be honest, this predates my Rocklin tenure, but I will also put forward, because this is true where I was and other places, that we switched to a new Common Core assessment, and there is absolutely a ramp up in scores as people get used to the test, right? So if you remember way back to when we did before Common Core, districts were scoring really high and kind of scored higher every year because we learned how to take the test.
Right.
And so I think you're seeing also an adjustment with the new test in here.
And then the other reality is 14-15 was our first post-recession year. And so we actually had funds to start doing professional learning, to start working on things. So we have what Bill said, a new assessment. This was the new Common Core, that shift, you all remember, the new math and all that. But we actually had some resources to start doing the training and doing that. And we were doing intensive professional learning. We were doing days and days, within like 4 days, whole days, release days within a year. This is when we did have a lot of our sixth grade and, this is Marty said, seventh grade teachers working together. So we did see some other pieces that went through that really was a focus, because math was we did ELA and we did math separate. So there was a huge intense focus, a lot of support for it was our first work with coaches and also the training. And then things kind of became, and you will say, kind of routinized. And so we also then had less resources focused in on math. And so I think there's a combination of all of that that comes into play.
Okay, so we're going to do some more of that.
That is the plan. So I am gonna, because we're gonna talk about improvement science, and you've heard us say this a lot of times, and I wanted to be sure we had a common language here. I'm gonna do a blitz of improvement science, because I know some of you know quite a bit. So this is gonna be a quick segment. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that is kind of our Bible we've been working out of. And so this is the 101. And if you want to dive deeper into this, feel free to reach out to me or Marty, and we can walk through it with you, because there is a lot there. It's really robust. It's actually really great stuff. But just basically, and you've heard it a couple times already tonight, systems are perfectly designed to get the results we're getting. So if we just keep doing what we're doing, we're going to see those scores continue to be the same, and we're going to get the same results. I also think about it like a wheel rut, right? A wheel likes to stay in its rut. Education is very routinized. It changes very slowly. We try sometimes to force the wheel out of the rut, but the natural tendency is to move back into the rut, right? And teachers know this because they'll say, well, I'm just going to wait this one out because we're going to go back to the other one, right? So, and it's true. We do a lot of stuff. And that's also part of this other piece of this is this idea of solutionitis. Let's try something, and then it may or may not work, and then we kind of drift back into the rut. So improvement science is great. It gives us a disciplined, data-focused approach to change, right? Instead of just jumping to a solution like, let's buy a new curriculum or let's buy more technology, we actually spend time, and this is the slower part, we spend time understanding what the actual problem is. And then we try to solve the real problem instead of shooting off or throwing spaghetti at the wall. Quick example is, and I can say this because I used to work as a teacher in Los Angeles Unified, and one of their solutions about 10 years ago was, let's buy an iPad for every single student. And you know they have hundreds of thousands of students, so do the math. Because if we do that, then they're going to learn. It's going to fix the stuff. And it sounds funny now, but they really did this. And so they bought every kid an iPad, and then they put them in classrooms, and kids didn't learn. They couldn't figure, and actually their achievement went down. And so lots of problems there, right? And you can probably think of a few. No teacher training, no connection to why, no understanding of why students were learning or that technology could fix that. And putting a really powerful tool that can also be equally powerfully distracting in the hands of teachers and students was not a good solution. And I have friends who work in Los Angeles, and iPads rolling in the front door and rolling out the back door, right? So there are all sorts of issues with that solution. So not well thought out, but we do this all the time in education. We buy new curriculums, we put new strategies into place, we do some training for a year, and then it kind of drops off, right? So that's the reason why our teachers say, I'm going to wait this one out, because we haven't really spent the time to understand the problem. So improvement science does that. The other big idea is that it's based on the idea of practitioners, like frontline people who are doing the work. They're best positioned to know what works and what does not work. So we can sit up here and prescribe solutions, but we should really be asking the people doing the work. Another quick example is I use a Swiffer every weekend to clean my kitchen. So once upon a time, Procter & Gamble wanted to come up with a great new cleaning product, and they had scientists mixing chemicals and trying to figure out the proper mix to break down dirt, and they couldn't come up with it. They spent tons of money. They said, this isn't going on, I have an idea. Let's ask people who clean houses. Let's ask them what they need. And they said, well, the mop gets really dirty, and it's hard to clean it, and the floors stay dirty, so what we need is like some sort of actual broom thing that we can change out and switch it out. And they invented the Swiffer. It's like the most popular cleaning instrument ever invented. So this idea that if you actually ask the people doing the work, surprised, they can tell you what the problems are. And so part of this process is really doing an in-depth systems investigation, asking the users, what are the problems? What do we need to fix? And they tell us, and then we address those problems. So it actually has several phases. So you start with a team of practitioners and other folks who actually know what the work is. You do a very thorough investigation of the system to understand where your pain points are. You develop a focus. You identify a problem, and then you identify a goal, like we want to change math improvement. And then you actually do this whole process where you do very small tests. Like, let's try this tiny thing, because the other thing is, when you buy 200,000 iPads and it fails, that's a big failure, it hurts. If I try something, and if I buy an iPads for a classroom and test it, if it fails, okay, it's okay, we can move on to the next thing. So this idea of small tests, and then when you find something that actually does work based on data, you scale it. Like you do, you scale it to a school or a district, and you have a solution. So this idea that we would create an improvement science team of teachers, principals, district office staff. We would do an investigation. We'd look at data. We'd conduct interviews of kids and parents and teachers. We'd look at current pathways. Are there ways our system is set up where kids don't have access to courses they need, or they can't get they can't get where they need to get? We'll look at current research on the topic and understand what research is saying about best practices. And that's when we start to we build these, this is called a fishbone diagram. So we identify all the problems, we identify our goal, and then we start to think about what are possible solutions to some of the problems we've outlined. This is actually, you can't see it because it's so small, but this is actually an improvement science map we made to address attendance or suspension rates in high school. So we did this, we were doing this work before the pandemic. We had many teams doing improvement science work. We had some good things being trialed, and then the pandemic happened. So we're going back to what we've already done. Part of this, of course, is finding the problem, having a SMART goal or an aim statement, and then we develop a diagram of change ideas that we can actually try out in classrooms. Once we have a change idea, we do what's called a plan, do, study, act cycle, a PDSA. These are small changes. We think about what do we want to try, what's the impact we want, and then we try it, we take data, we describe what we learned, and then we iterate, like, okay, so this kind of worked, but let's change this piece. We do another cycle. Oh, that worked even better, but let's do this tweak, and we do it again. So at Whitney High School, 2 years ago, we were doing this with social emotional learning. We were having teachers came up with, well, I bet if we just greet kids at the door and say hello to them, it'll improve our relationships and therefore improve their performance in the class. And they found that it did, actually. So they didn't have to do a lot, but by starting to talk to kids and ask questions, the kids were more connected, and they talked to teachers more and got more help, and so they started to kind of expand that. So that's how this system works. Okay, that was the blitz. That makes sense? Questions,
So
thoughts?
when we do the test consolidate, your PDSAs, are we doing multiple of those? We're not doing 4 or 5, and we're doing multiple people, multiple ideas, multiple times?
So you could theoretically test 20 ideas in 20 classrooms, small pieces. But the beauty of doing a district work around math is we can do what's called a network improvement piece. It's a NIC, a community. So we could test ideas at multiple schools and then have ways to, a committee sharing those, and we can kind of iterate together and we can get faster results that way. So yeah, absolutely.
It just so you know, I mean, this really goes back about 3 years, and Dr. Kathy Pond led some of this. Bill's, really dove into this as well. So each school has really tried some of this, but just as we started getting rolling, pandemic hit, and it's really gone back. But this is the first time from a district view that we're going to be leading some of this work.
And the exciting part is, we don't want to just have, again, the cynicism of, well, this 1 year. This is where, when we talked about math, we said, this is 3 to 5 years of a focus to really change the system. What we also want to do is teach the system how to improve. So by being explicit in the use of improvement science tools, methodology, we want to teach and enculturate in the system how to improve. So when we take the next big challenge, we already have practices and methodology that we use to do this. And you could even extrapolate this to, you could use this to how to better clean a classroom with custodians. I mean, so we really are working to change a culture, because everybody talks about continuous improvement. It's one of the best buzzwords in education. But we really want to teach the system how to fix and improve itself. And that's why we're being so explicit in how we do this, and we really want to take the time to do it right and go deep, because we really want to build that understanding. And so that's even with the board. So really from the board to the classroom, we're working to do this, which is why we wanted to really spend the time here, and why we gave you 170 pages, the book we've given to you all, and we invite you to question, but we're going to explicitly use the jargon and the pieces, because we're learning that, and so we're building a common understanding. And so we really see this as a big lever in this system to drive change, not just to math, but beyond.
Yeah, just, again, leveraging off the data, I don't want to impede the incremental improvement that happens by allowing people to venture out, try things. And if you're looking at the data and using it, you might find, I'm just using an example, a math teacher in a cobblestone has had some great success, but it's not part of the overall process, but they've had some good success, so leverage that when you can. But I don't want the cobblestone teacher, as the example, to stop doing what they're doing and wait for the great opportunity that's going to come 3 years down the road when we get to this overall plan, right? I want to try to keep it all
what
going.
we do want to do is provide that cobblestone teacher a way to share that idea with, his or her colleagues, and then maybe with other schools if it really is good. And we might scale this, we might learn that, you know, we need a new curriculum, or we need a better understanding of conceptual math teaching, or we need a web-based stuff, we need better interventions, or we need better transitions. We might learn that, but at least we've learned it and we're sure that's the issue, right? Instead of just doing one-offs and not knowing, yeah. All right, Marty, so here we go.
All right, so our planned math improvement journey. Again, I'm not going to read these verbatim, but our goals for next year, really discuss, pilot, build agreement around common. You know, Rick, this is something you've brought up. You know, why is that difference between Whitney and Rocklin? What's going on there? Well, unless we have common assessment, it's going to be a challenge. So that's some of the work we're going to dive into. We need to identify and adopt and train personnel on district data tracking and display tool. We have to have an easy system. You know, we've tried them over the years, but they've been so complex that teachers, they don't have time and they don't see benefit in that. They don't see that data being accurate. So why am I going to waste my time when I have to grade these papers, when I have to plan and go on? We need to get a data system that is quick and easy for our teachers to use. We have to do the systems investigation that Bill's talking about here. We have to analyze the problem. We have to identify those root causes, and we have to get that aim statement. What's our measure? How are we going to measure whether or not it's successful? What is our goal? That driver diagram with potential change ideas. And then we have to dive in and conduct, as Bill, great example, the PDSA. What works, what doesn't work. And let's not put a ton of time, effort, and resources into it. Let's do small little PDSAs and then build upon that. And then if you recall from Hannah when she presented the LCAP with math being that goal, by December of next year, we should have that to where we'll come back and we'll write a more measurable, focused goal. What are some areas that we're going to explore?
Distinction between the aim and the goal. Do you want to try to keep them separate, or you ultimately want to make it one, or how do you think about
Well, we want something that could be measurable. Okay, if you just say that we want all students to be successful, what does that mean?
Right.
If you put something in there that can measure, and then we can identify whether or not we reach that goal.
I guess I'm saying is you laid out adopting aim as part of your process. Could you see a scenario where we adopt a district-wide aim and that aim becomes our LCAP goal?
In the
Yes.
area of math, yes.
Yes.
Yes. And that's when we come back and we'll have that more focused goal. That's the purpose of that, and that is our goal by doing that.
I think just, again, on that first bullet, you have the discuss, pilot, the build agreement. I think, and again, just seeing it in other industries, the key thing is going to be an operational definition of what to measure, how to measure, and when to measure. Because if you allow it to just, I grade this way, Rick grades a different way, you're never going to be able to compare the data school to school, class to class,
Yeah.
program to program.
And that's where it has been a challenge at the secondary. No matter what. And I do want, as teachers hear this, oh my gosh, common assessment. Are we talking every unit? No, not every unit right now. But we have to have some way, we should be able to look at all students taking integrated one. Now, integrated one, you're looking at 4 different schools there, because an 8th grader is no different than a 9th grader. So we have to measure what are they successful and what areas do we have to improve in. And just like you said about the cobblestone, if we have someone at Granite Oaks teaching integrated one and they're doing amazing stuff and getting amazing results, well, Whitney and Rocklin have to look at that as well, and vice versa.
Do you feel we have in place what we need to be successful for these goals, 2021 to 22?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
These are great goals for 2021 to 20. Do you have what you need right now to achieve these goals? Time
Yes.
for the teachers to collaborate, time to gather that data, to assess that data, identify, adopt, train personnel. Do we have that personnel already in place?
I'm going to disagree, no. And I'm going to, and the reason is no, and we do not currently have the resources. However, with the one-time funds coming in, and as we look at what we want to do, we will have resources that we want to use to really put a ton of resources in, and then there will be a sustainment piece that we're looking to do on some of those resources. But we don't have the resources now, and we're going to need more professional learning time, more time for collaboration. We're going to need more on-the-ground folks. Like you'll hear in our learning loss, this is we're going to propose that we need a couple math coaches. We're also going to need that type of data support. We don't have a good data system to allow us to do this on the ground for teachers to have access to on a more regular basis. We're going to need, I mean, I'm just so excited. We're going to need also frankly, in our ed services, as great as Marty and Bill are, we're going to need more capacity to really lead this, take this on, and drive this, because we see the board being updated every month on this, and where are we at? Well, there, you know, so no, we do not at all right now have the resources, but because the board signaled this goal, as we looked into the budget, we looked at how we're working to make out budget recommendations to have the resources that involve time, talent, and then just the materials to do this as we build through. So, you know, no, but if we don't tell you what we want to do and then explain why we need those resources, hopefully you'll see that together.
Just following up, the curriculum is one path, our improvement science and that is another path. They have to merge, right? At some point, we have to get to a new math curriculum, but it's not, this isn't the result of our analysis, it's more of an and, not a.
We kind of talk about it in this next one. You know, we don't know, and we don't want to jump to that solutionitis. We want to really, truly go in, because maybe the curriculum we have is great, but maybe some of our teachers aren't trained to its full potential. So again, that's kind of the fear, and that's why we really want to take this deep dive into this. What's working, what's not working, and how are we going to improve it?
Well,
Yeah, and that's one of, oh, go ahead.
It's okay. The reason I asked what I asked was because I would love for 21-22 to be a year where we're able to make movement in this so we can make the best curriculum decisions the following year and 2 years. Sure. I would hate for this to be a 5-10 year process where we have curriculum and then we maybe adopt something that wasn't necessary or needed. Whereas I would love to see 21-22 really be this, like you said, that improvement science, ask the users, what are the problems, what do you need? So when it comes time to make those decisions the following year, we're making decisions based off of our users, what they're telling us they need. And so I would hope that we don't wait, or that we're able to empower you next year to do that. So that way in 22-23 or 22-23, we're not at that point trying to still gather data.
And part of the improvement science piece is always gathering the data, looking at that. And frankly, we want to be upfront that we'll be flexible. If we feel we need to look at a curriculum adoption sooner, we'll bring that forward. If we feel we're not ready, we'll work to delay. We put a target of we think it's around here. We also know that if we rushed out and did that, it actually gets in the way of doing the improvement work, because then everybody focuses on how to do the new book. And so we want to learn what are the needs, because part of this will be defining, well, what do we need out of a new curriculum? Does it, you know, what has really good support materials? What teaches this well? Because this is a gap for our kids. So this is an approximate, we think it will, but we really intend to use this to help build in so we're smarter around that. And have us revisit, because we did make an educated guess on, we think a 6-12 gives us better articulation, but we haven't necessarily seen, so is that the right journey to go? Or do we revert back? So a lot of good questions that we'll have to explore.
One thing I just want to add to that is please understand that our teachers are constantly working to improve. You know, this is something that through ed services, we'll do this improvement science, but on a daily basis, there's always improvement.
And Trustee Sadoff, I will say we selected these goals because we feel like they're very achievable for next year. And you'll see that the goal is to develop common assessments to be implemented in the next year, because there's a lot of committee work with our teachers and teams that needs to happen to do that. And getting a data system and training people on it, we can do next year. And doing the investigation and talking to users, we can do that next year so we understand the problem. And then, Trustee Counter, I was going to say that the curriculum thing's interesting because I have a theory about Common Core based on my own experience, is that, and you hear from parents like, I don't understand this Common Core math, it's become kind of a joke. But I feel like there's a deep disconnect between people's understanding of conceptual understanding and multiple solution pathways that is really powerful. The research, like our Bridges curriculum is amazing. I don't think we take full advantage of it because I don't know that we have a full understanding of how the pieces fit together. So there's an idea that maybe it's not the curriculum. Maybe we need more training, and we need to understand how to implement this better. And I think that's a real, again, these are the questions, these are the things we need to figure out, because Mr. Stock's exactly right. Like, whenever we buy a curriculum, that becomes the thing. Nothing else, everything else is off the table. So we have to be careful.
So just to continue, again, we've talked about many of these areas, but these are just potential areas that we'll be exploring. Is it a new curriculum? Is it assessment? Is it instruction, pedagogy, interventions, and acceleration opportunities? What is it? And then the last one there is the mindset, and we'll be talking about that more. Kids, have a tendency, I'm not good in math. You hear that, all right? Even before they walk in, and that's like an athlete saying, well, why even play the game? I'm going to lose. And that's an area. But these are all potential areas that once we go through this systems investigation, we will decide on one, and then we'll go from there.
I don't know the answer to this, but I'd be curious to know, there's a lot of research done around growth mindset and self-talk around art. So you'll notice little kids think they're an amazing artist, right? And it's horrific, right? But then there is a point, and I don't know what it is, but there is a point when they realize, I am not a good artist. And actually, kids stop drawing around, I don't know what the age is. We'll say it's 10, but I haven't read it for a long time. But I'd be curious to know if there will be that same kind of point where kids change their mindset about math, where it becomes maybe too challenging or maybe out of their comfort zone, right? And they decide, and we see a shift. It would be interesting to know if that happens.
And again, it's interesting, some of the new work going into the new frameworks really talk about that. Kids learning at an early age, and then they have this defeated attitude. And regardless, they could have the best teacher in the world, but if they go in there with a poor attitude, so.
It's like Sir Ken Robinson's research on creativity, like we beat it out of kids, right, in
Totally.
schools.
Totally.
And it's true. And the interesting thing about math is you hear adults in our culture say, I'm not good at math, and it's kind of like a badge of honor. You never hear adults say, I'm a bad reader,
Totally.
right? Because it's not socially acceptable, but for some reason, it's okay to be bad at math. And the other thing you hear is we teach math like it's a dead language, like it's Latin. Like you memorize these things, it's a fixed thing. But if you talk to actual mathematicians, they will tell you it's highly creative and interesting, and it's this problem solving, and it's artistic. And so how do we get our kids to that point, right? How do we shift that is the
Yeah.
real question.
The engineer versus the architect. No, just kidding. Yeah.
There's basic steps to the whole math thing, right? You have to have the fundamentals of 1 through 12 and addition to subtraction and multiplication of it all the way through it. But then there's a part where when you get into calculus, it's problem solving, and it's breaking things down to smaller, and it's not easy, but you got to teach kids how to solve problems.
Okay, so this is just a little more detail. We had mentioned before, like, what we want to do in the first half of the year is we want to convene this committee. We want to conduct this investigation and do, find research, talk to users, do interviews, really identify the problems and root causes in our district. We want to develop that aim statement or a goal by the end of the first trimester in this driver diagram that has like some change ideas. Here's some things we might try in classrooms. And then, of course, we're going to be updating you on pieces. In the second half of the year, we really want to start to implement some solutions at a small scale, start to consolidate and share learning, maybe even pilot. We talked about those common assessments, maybe start to pilot and finalize common assessments across our grade levels so we're ready for the following year. The other thing that I've heard definitely from Trustee Counter is this idea that we should do something now while we're doing the investigation. And as we get into the learning loss piece, I want to assure you that we are going to put math interventions in place starting at the beginning of next year, because we know small group instruction works, and we know we can target certain skills, and that will help some students. And we'll tweak that as we go along. We're going to hopefully put some math coaches in place to help guide some of this work. So we want to do some things now, but we also want to be careful about not coming to a solution too quickly.
When you think about moving forward with all this, and it looks great, how do you think about different segments of our system? So is this one large effort, or is there a distinction between elementary and middle, or secondary and elementary?
I think about it as to me, improvement science, the map will give you multiple different directions to go depending on the issue. And I think the issues could be different in secondary than in elementary. So I think maybe you find that, 6th to 7th grade transitions and transitions are an issue, you're going to address those there. In the elementary, maybe it's a instructional piece around conceptual understanding. In high school, maybe it's course access and intervention. So I think there's different solutions at different levels, and this gives us the flexibility to do some of that work.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's my hypothesis, is that you'll have different. So if you look just at the notion of common assessment, which I love, appreciate, Owen. So, I mean, elementary teachers will, first of all, obviously MAP's there, it's not secondary, so it's a much higher lift, and we're gonna have to deal with. In addition to the fact that elementary teachers will likely say, we use curriculum-embedded common assessments across our grade levels, and we're good to go. And there's an argument to that, but again, I think it's a different argument at different levels that we're gonna have to be prepared to.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that the secondary will be a harder lift with the assessment piece.
And then it also is chunking that. So we might find as we investigate that within integrated one, it's this particular concept or unit, and that may be the building block of the first common assessment area is we're gonna focus on this piece versus the whole course piece. And then, because what we don't want is to be, well, until we have the perfect, validated, reliable assessment 3 years later. So
The
it's
beauty of that
also-
too is then you can use IABs, right? So if
Right.
something exists, you could pull it just for that standard, do just that, and then make a progress. Yeah, that's great.
And that's really what the strongest PLCs we have, many in our district, that's what they do is they look at a unit, a concept they've done, they look at the data, they look at what do we need to do, what's the reteaching, the essential skills. So we have some of those practices, but it's going to systems of them versus isolated incidences of them, whether it be in a single classroom, a single PLC, or maybe even in a single department.
So the next part is just projecting forward and this could change, this is gonna evolve as we do the work. So we wanna implement our PDSA cycles and change ideas. We wanna consolidate the learning. We wanna scale things that work. We wanna implement common assessments for sure, because we know we need those to drive this work. So we need the data to say, is it working or not? Are we seeing changes? And we don't currently have that. And then there is that consideration of, are we gonna pilot, are we gonna look at math adoption, and are we gonna implement? But that really is depending on what we find. And then the 23-24 year, we talk about implementation and scaling of high leverage strategies. And again, I see strategies thinking, oh, these little things, this could be a big thing. This could be a, major professional development in elementary or middle school or high school, or an adoption, or other pieces. So it gets bigger. It just starts small.
How does our, the money that we're getting, the date that it has to be spent by coordinate with these dates?
Most of the money, about $7 million of the $15 million, has to be spent by August of '22. Then there is some of the federal money that can go to '23, '24.
Okay.
Some of it learning loss, some not. So the bulk of the money has to be spent next year, and that's why you're going to see the learning loss has really like a surge. I mean, ideally, we would be able to, we want to extend these dollars as far as we can. So we're frankly going to be looking at how do we thoughtfully use our Title I, Title II, supplemental dollars because you can only do so much in a year. I mean, the teacher can only have so much professional learning in 1 year.
Really?
You can only have so much going on. So you can't just surge through 15 million in a year and expect it to have. So we're going to really work to extend as much as we can, but there is a bulk of it that does need to go next year, which is why you'll see in the next segment where we start to look at, okay, how do we do some things that we think have some track record, and then how do we work within that? So we want to do a little more with data. We want to begin to put in some other place like the math coaches and look to extend. And so we want to begin to try to learn some things as quick as we can as we're dealing with learning loss pieces simultaneously. So we'll be looking to use some of the other dollars to extend the math work and also begin to look at that dual immersion piece, which was a board priority. So our goal is to see how can we get as much of a leg on this. And like I said, Title I, Title II supplemental, we'll be looking at those carryovers because those target the students that are in the most need anyway, our foster youth students that are in poverty and our English learners. And so by thinking about it in that way, we can really hopefully extend a little bit. But then the other piece is, we'll have to make priority choices. We'll recommend, the board will decide about what we want to invest and what we don't want to do. Because again, there is a capacity issue of we can only do so much even if we had a lot of resources. So,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
One other question, I apologize, I don't remember the answer to this. The two instructional coaches that we have, do they currently work with math? The two gals, Ann Felice and the other cute girl?
Amanda Bannister.
Amanda, yeah. Do they do math right now?
They do. They support all subjects.
All
So
subjects,
they do
okay.
ELA and math.
And K through 12?
They support it, but Amanda is a language arts teacher, but she's an amazing teacher, so she can support it in that.
And is this their last year? Or they have,
As of right now, yes, they're set to
rotation.
term
Okay.
out.
And so the last piece of this is just our first steps, and we've kind of covered this. We would like to put together a team this year of K-12 teachers and administrators, do a Improvement Science 101 training, and then use that team to actually develop our tools. So analyze the math data, some of the math data we've looked at tonight in a deeper way, develop the interview tools and like who are we going to talk to, what information are we going to gather, map out kind of our current system and look at research. And our coaches actually have done a bunch of research, which is super helpful on this already. So thank you, Ann and Amanda. And because we want to be able to take, hopefully be in a position next year to move this forward. Like, so as soon as we come back to start this process of investigating the system. So if we can do this in the next 8 weeks, that would be a big help. We're going to talk to you next about allocating resources for support. How are we going to do this for the next 3 to 5 years, which is really what it takes to change a system and get real change in a school district.
so if there's not more on that, we actually, believe it or not, are a little bit ahead of our schedule, and we're ready to flip into the learning loss portion, of this. So if everyone's good.
I do
Okay, if
have
we're
a
ahead, why don't we
question.
take a break? Just 2 minutes.
Yeah,
Why don't
so
we just take a quick 2-minute break?
Do you want to?
I could, just real quick, just looking at time and looking at some of the improvement plans and the journeys, and I'll get you a break. Do we have identified, and I was just looking at like essentially trimesters, do we have things scheduled for like fall of '21 where we'll talk about the teams and the sites and the problems, and then winter, root causes and the aim statement, and like we can have, I'd love to see before we go, it's on schedule, it's on task, here's when we're gonna get the updates so that it's not if it's gonna come, it's on this board date, we're gonna have an update on X,
So
Y,
if
and
you can go to slide 28, please. So what you can see, August to December, we plan to start providing monthly board updates in September, because August is the first week of August, we aren't in session. So September, October, November, December, we have one boarding meeting each. We have a study session in there as well. So our thought is every month we're having an update to the board on the work in mathematics.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you, and I like that. I'm looking at, hey, on this time, this is when we'll have our teams and our sites and our problem statements identified. I'm just making up, in like October, November, that's when we'll be talking about root cause and aim statements, and that way we can kind of see progression.
And that's the work in the next 8 weeks we're hoping to begin doing. And is to really start mapping that out. The other piece is we really, while the board set the direction, we really want this to be from the ground up. We want teachers, principals buying in. So part of it is we want to work with them to develop that schedule, that they feel they're part of it. And because we will have success if people buy in. If we don't, they'll go shut their door, do what they think is best, and ignore us. And that's just because they're doing their best and they, are in a sense trying to survive. And so we want them to feel they're part of helping develop that plan and that cycle, though we know we're publicly committing to some goals with you all. And so that's where those specifics we need to do with them versus give to them.
I agree 100%. If you just hand it to them, it's not going to work. If they have some say in the decision-making and the process of creating it, then they'll have the buy-in and they'll believe it's going to work. Because if they don't believe it's going to work, whatever they do, it's going to take hours and hours and hours of extra work And if they really do it, it's going to take weekends and nights because they can't do it while they're teaching. So they're going to have to believe in it in order for it to really have a go.
And we're not going to have 400 teachers on the committee, but we need about 400 teachers doing math work. About, every elementary teacher teaches math, and then the secondary teachers. And so you're talking in that range. So we really have to create a way for the system to buy in, not just the folks that want to come to a committee and do that work and do that, but to really convince everyone that around this work. And again, we can compel, but you don't get real change through that. And that's what we want. And if we really want folks to develop the understanding of the how and the why, that's where that works from. So we're very excited about it. But we also do know that at the end of the day, we need to improve things for kids because these kids with us have 1 year of third grade, 1 year of fourth grade, and we have an obligation to have some urgency around improving things for them as well, too. And our teachers do that, and they know that, and that's why they do the weekends and evening work.
And along those lines, I would love to see the opportunity, and it may be built in, for teachers and parents to assess that data before, I'm looking at slide 27, the potential areas of exploration. Those are phenomenal. I think how we look at the data will vastly change which of these you put as priority, right? And I'm sure that's a part of the process, and I don't need to get into the weeds. But one of the beauty of MAP scores is it opens a dialogue and a conversation. It's an assessment point, but it opens conversation between the parent and the teacher, the two people that know that child and know possibly why we're seeing the scores that we're seeing. And so just a thought there, if it's not built in, before we take that data and make decisions off of it, it would be really beneficial for the teachers of those students to look at that data and say, ooh, I'm surprised by the data. Let me tell you why. Or, yeah, the data's accurate. That's what I see in the classroom, and move on from there. I just get nervous sometimes with assessments. We take that one data point and make decisions when there may be other factors the parents and the teachers could bring to the table that may not be a part of those committees, but have very valid points and suggestions.
And that's why the growth data is critical too, because I could be a student that's behind in math and is low achieving, but I actually have worked, my teacher has worked with me and my parent has, and I've made tremendous growth, but I may not be there yet. So how do we look at that growth as well? And that's where it's often you can have a student that either is, or even a parent that's frustrated, but when they see the growth, it's like, no, there is improvement occurring. And how do we accelerate and sustain? Because you'll hear in our learning loss piece, one of the challenges in secondary is we just keep kids, we move them on life support through math to keep graduating versus actually cure the issues that's causing that. But we're very successful at life support, but it's very expensive in terms of resources and on kids too. So anyway.
But again, to that point, I mean, I've sat with parents where maybe the state has a cutoff point and using the terms far below basic, when that kid's made tremendous growth, and you see it, and then their confidence goes up. Parents are happy because they've been successful and they've seen that, even though the state may determine that they're far below basic, they've made tremendous growth. So I think that's a great point.
However, if they're not A through G ready when they leave us, I hate to say it doesn't matter, but reality, their preparation for life beyond us, that's the reality of what we need to do. So we want to celebrate the growth, motivate, but we also have to have acceleration in ways that we move that, because in some cases for a child, 1 year's growth is not going to be sufficient to move them where they need to be. So we have to be real thoughtful around that as well. Because again, those terminal A through G, are you ready? That's the 13-year experience with us that we're accountable for.
I'm going for it.
We'll bring the meeting back together, and I'll just refer back to the two gentlemen. Let's talk learning loss.
Sure this is on. Again, moving forward, and the next part is focused on the learning loss, and Bill will spend time talking about elementary, and I'll follow up and talk about secondary. But as we developed these plans, we had some key questions that we looked at. First off, what is learning loss? How do we measure it? What have we found? Who's most impacted? How will we address these issues? And again, we've mentioned it throughout some of our math talk. We're going to be talking about it in learning loss as well. What students are most impacted, and what do we do now? What do we do this summer? What do we do next year? What do we do the following summer? And then how do we figure out what's working so we can continue that on? And as Superintendent Stock mentioned, take some of this money and spread that out, extend that to best meet the needs of kids, to where it's not a one and done. Okay, that worked great. We're going to have to figure out what works, and if it does work, how are we going to continue that? As far as addressing some of that, just a quick thing, and of all people, I believe all of you understand this, but as a quick reminder, we closed schools on March 13th of 2020. We conducted distance learning, in 3 days. Remember that? We took 3 days off to get teachers prepared. Then we came back from March to September. We opened RVC in a matter of 6 weeks. Shout out to Miss Anderson for putting that together. But that was a fully online opportunity for students in TK through 12. Then board voted to bring students back September 21st. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Superintendent Stock mentioned that we only missed 27 days of school. And if you watch the news where some schools are just now coming back and some still aren't, we only missed 27 days of school. So shout out to the board, shout out to our teachers, everyone for their involvement there. And then, as many of you who visited schools yesterday, fully returned to a traditional all kids on campus 5 days a week just yesterday. And I could say that I was out at schools as well. Kids were excited, teachers were excited, principals were excited, parents were excited. It was a great day, and I know all of us here were at a number of schools. So
what is this learning loss thing? And the truth is it can be kind of slippery. So I wanted to start with this quote from Pace. So we talked about Pace earlier this year, but this idea that there's been significant learning loss in both English, language arts, and mathematics, and that the equity impact on different groups of students is severe. So Pace put this out actually in, I think it was January of this year, and even since then, there's questions about this, who it's true for, what is the amount of learning loss. And the truth is, I'm not sure anyone has a firm grasp on it yet. There actually has been some assessment, but there's a general lack of assessment. If you talk to some teachers, and you'll hear from some in this presentation, things are really bad. We got a lot of learning loss. If you talk to other teachers, it's been the best year ever. Kids have learned more than in past years. There's a couple things I think we can say universally that are probably true. And one of the things is that the impact of learning loss has been more in math, especially in the upper grades, than in English language arts. In English language arts, it seems less, or not at all in some cases. But math is definitely, we've seen some declines here in Rocklin and nationally. What I kind of liked about some of the reports I looked at is our Rocklin data, and I'll show this to you, almost says exactly the same thing as what the national data on learning loss is saying, and it's those things, math more than ELA, and I think we all agree that the equity impact is severe. So for students who were struggling before the pandemic or in those targeted groups, homeless, EL, foster youth, the impact is much greater than our students who are succeeding or have home support, and so that's definitely true. This next slide, actually, so we've talked about elementary data and the universal screening. So one of the things we currently have is we have English language arts data from several years now, over 3 or 4 years, in terms of we do this 4 times a year. We have a baseline. We do it trimester 1, we do it trimester 2. And this year, based on this data, is a little different. So we measure how many kids are at level or advanced. And remember, these are based on multiple measures. So we're looking, these include MAP scores, but they also include local assessments in the classroom and other screeners, and then teachers actually get to rate their students based on that data. But based on what we're seeing in trimester 2 of this year, and this was the same thing that was true in trimester 1, there are this many less kids in each grade level that are at level or advanced. So you can see in kindergarten, that's almost 100 less kids who are in the at level or advanced. That's across all our schools. In 6th grade, there's 111 less kids that are at level or advanced in English language arts than last year. So that's fairly significant in terms of students where we want them to be by the end of the year.
Just hang on, just real quick. So just to translate it, for first grade, you have 114. That's 114 across all of our schools that are not at.
So that's 114 first graders across all our elementary schools, different than last year. So last year, the number would be, say last year we had 600 students in that category. This year we have 486. So it's a difference between the 2 years in proficiency.
Does this take into consideration the number of students that were lost? How do the numbers compare?
The student losses, there is some of that in here, but it's like less significant in terms of these numbers and how they play out. So that might account for 10 to 15 students. Mm-hmm. So we see a difference in ELA. The other thing we can look at in elementary is map data. And what we can say when we look at our map data, and this is growth data, so what map does is we nationally norm it. And so if a student scores a 200, they'll give us a growth point, and they'll say, well, by this time next year, that student should be at 215. And if either they meet that growth target or they don't meet that growth target, and that's against all students nationally. So when we look at ELA, our students in mostly in 2nd through 6th grade are meeting or exceeding growth targets in ELA, which is interesting. So we haven't seen, and this is the same as at the beginning of this school year, we shared some of this data. So we're not seeing major differences in English language arts for students in Rocklin in terms of learning loss. However, go ahead.
That's what you'd expect to see, which is to say, to the point of we've been in school much longer than most kids across the country, you would expect us to have much larger gains.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
In fact, if we didn't, that would be gravely concerning to me.
Yes, absolutely. However, we are seeing that especially in 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, students are not meeting their growth targets in mathematics. So, and this data is here, and what you see in this chart is you'll see the top 2 are the 4th and 5th grade cohort from fall to fall. So fall last year to fall of this year, and then from winter to winter. So we have 2 data points, and in both cases, the blue is the projected growth, and the red is what we actually see from our students. And you can see that we're not meeting projected growth. In 5th and 6th grade, you see it's a little more severe in the fall, but it's still significant in the winter that students are not meeting their growth targets in mathematics. So that was, again, the same thing we noticed earlier, the same thing that's being kind of confirmed nationally is that math looks like we've lost a step in terms of an area that maybe we need to focus on for learning loss. Questions about that? Okay. So the other point I wanted to share with you is I wanted to hear actually from people in the classroom, teachers, instructional aides, and I wanted to hear from principals about, well, what are they noticing? What do they see at schools? So I asked them in a survey, gave me 3 words that describe student learning during the pandemic, and then what will be the greatest area of need in 2021? And I asked them to consider academic, behavior, and social emotional. And so I had a good number of people respond to this, and as me and Marty found, they had a lot to say. So here's a Wordle, and I think this Wordle is pretty interesting because to me it captures this issue. So you see remember Wordles like amplify the words that come up a lot. So you see these big words like lack of, and I think lack of stamina was a very common theme, like minimal, disproportionality, the idea of disproportionality and inequity was high. But you also see a lot of things like minimal loss, or it was inconsistent, or disproportional. So there's this, or innovate, or support. So there's also positive words mixed in there because the experiences are different out there. So some people, again, like I said, saw this as a real opportunity, but I think there's universal agreement that some of the things were lost in this and there's gaps that exist for students. And you see actually on the right-hand side, math coming up and English language arts not coming up, which was interesting as well, or reading. Yeah, Liz. And I think we know that's true. So just briefly, here's some comments. So some academic area, we need support for small groups. We need to streamline our resources and focus on our most in-need students. It was inequitable. It depended on home support. We need to level the playing field next year and offer additional support to specific students. K2 students, we know struggled online. They're missing foundational skills. We need to focus on depth, not breadth. So we need to go deeper in essential skills. And we did do that this year, but many teachers said, we got to stay on that track, like shrink it down, focus on what matters. So behavioral, communication issues, social skill issues. How do we take what we learned this year and make it the new normal? Like, we did see low behaviors this year. How do we keep that trend moving? Many students who are online may have trouble with basic classroom kind of behavior pieces. Students have lost ability to focus. So they've been on computers and, I'll speak for my own kids, playing a lot of video games this year. And how do we re-engage them in long focus sessions? There may be attention-seeking behaviors. And then social-emotional, like this anxiety. So we are seeing, the one thing I saw yesterday is in 50% of the offices I went into yesterday, and I visited 8 schools, there was a child crying in the office, and because they were anxious and nervous to get back into school. A couple of them drew me pictures that I have in my car, and then they felt better, and they went to class. That's good, but we have to expect that kids are going to be anxious, and this is going to be something new and hard, especially for young kids. Need for social emotional supports. Additional support for teachers, how to help, resources for trauma-informed practices. This idea that we need to work with kids on growth mindset, and this idea that maybe kids have lost some of their grit or perseverance or stick-to-itiveness in the classroom. So these are all kind of teachers have risen these ideas up, but I think they're accurate and kind of support the other data sets as well. Questions about those pieces of data in elementary?
So it's not a question, it's just, I guess it's a thought, is that I really actually appreciate the way you've laid this out, because I share with you this concern around even the term warning loss or what it means, and I think you find more and more it's not universal. And the thing that really concerns me is, especially with the amount of money we're going to get thrown into the system, is that we do a bunch of Band-Aid solutions to get someone back on track this moment, and we've lost the entire point of trying to actually improve the system. And we won't actually get kids back on track in any meaningful way. So not overreacting to it's a one-time problem that we have to just fix this problem, but think about how we can actually, as creatively as possible, use one-time money for long-term gain, and think about how we invest in system change as opposed to a single intervention.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so way forward, we're going to talk about those 4 buckets. We have a summer, a school year, a summer, and a beyond. So this summer, what we're thinking about is we are going to have extended school year for special education and a summer school program. It's going to be at Rucola, June 14th to July 9th, so a typical 3-week summer school. We went with the typical and ordinary because people are tired and exhausted, and one of our biggest concerns is staffing this. And so that's going to be a constraint on us. We have hired our administrators, and we'll be recruiting staff, but that remains an obstacle this year after what everybody's been through. So what we'd like to do is we're going to think about this in levels based on the staffing we can get. We're absolutely going to address the needs of special education students. And then the next tier would be EL, homeless, and foster and Title I students. Can we get them into summer school and serve them? And then if we're able to get the staff, we will bring in other students who are not meeting grade level standards based on our universal screeners. We also want to do a kinder camp piece because we're recognizing that we know many kindergartners and even some maybe first graders have missed entire years of in-person instruction and may need to be oriented to school and have that experience in a classroom and learn those basic routines to get them started next year. So we know that's important. The focus will be that small group reading, like that, we're using that intervention that we've purchased in elementary. And then this idea of grade level specific essential math target skills. So what at that particular grade level is the most important thing that we can very specifically focus on for those 19 days and get growth on? Like, for example, in 3rd grade, maybe we should just work on multiplication, conceptual understanding, you know, multiple strategies to do multiplication, and fluency of facts. And if we can get those kids just with that skill and strengthen them, that's going to help them in 4th grade. The other thing we've been thinking about is, as we look at math interventions, because we are interested in purchasing one, if we can do that soon, we have an opportunity to pilot some things in summer school and say, this is great, this works for kids. And so we'd really like to use this as an opportunity to try some things out that we could scale next year. So we'll be hopefully starting that this summer. The other third piece in summer school we'd like to focus on is just social, emotional, and growth mindset. So this idea that these kids may have experienced more trauma than other students, and we want to understand that, support them, and also you know, help them feel efficacy and able to engage in students and increase their confidence. So that is the summer plan.
All right, yep, go ahead, and I'll go.
Do we have a curriculum or something to use for the SEL and growth mindset? Sorry, it's 'cause I'm
We do. We have a current curriculum that's in focus, so we can absolutely use that. One of the things we're going to investigate, and you'll hear about in this plan, is are there other tools that we can use? We have piloted the toolkit curriculum this year that Wellness Together uses. Has really good visuals, really good lessons, so we actually are going to look at probably expanding that or changing curriculum, because there's some issues with InFocus that it's adequate, but I think it's now 4 years old. We think there's better tools out there, so we'll be exploring that as well.
So I have a few questions. This is great. I really appreciate this. Is very thoughtful, and I like the tiering we're going for. I'm curious on a few things. One, on the tiering, when you say we're going to start with students, what does that mean? Does that mean they'll get a single letter to their house? Does that mean we're calling and contacting? What does it mean that? How are we letting them know this, and how are we encouraging as opposed to just letting them know it?
So we'll be reaching out to students with disabilities who have ESY as required part of their IEP and recruiting them to come in and offering the program to them.
And then as we move on to EL or homeless, again, we're actively recruiting as opposed to just informing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And hoping to, okay. And then I am curious, so how do we think of who can be a teacher in this moment? Because I agree we have an exhaustion problem. But so I was at Breen yesterday and sat in a class with a teacher who's not one of our teachers, who actually just got her credential. She actually is coming back to campus. She could be great, right? She just got her credential. She could be great, and she actually probably would be willing in a way. Are we expanding how we think of who could teach in summer school and be available for us?
I am open to all ideas for recruitment. And we will be increasing the hourly wage for summer school as well in an effort to recruit. But yes, we are open to anyone who has the skills and desire to do this at this point.
Awesome. All right. And the final thing I say to Rochelle's point is that I think SEL and growth mindset matters during summer school. I actually think fun matters more, right? So not more, but so like it just like the teachers are exhausted, the kids are exhausted too, and so making sure it's actually an enjoyable experience.
Yes.
Not just we're going to pound you because you didn't learn enough. Yeah.
And we've done an element of that. Like, you remember a couple years ago, we did a camp, we did a Camp Breen, and there was little campfires and tents. And so we recognize that. I fully agree with that. So thinking about next school year, and this is, big picture plan, there's lots of details, but the idea is that we want to support the systems we already have. So Roger mentioned at the beginning of this presentation how we've had systems in place, and here's an opportunity to really fully develop those systems and support them. And this crisis time is the time I'm glad that we have these systems in place, because now we get to use them, and it's important. So we're proposing this MTSS trifecta at all elementary schools. And what this is it's a learning loss teacher. It's a instructional aid that can assist that teacher for academic support all day, and an instructional aid that's actually focused also on behavioral and social emotional areas. So while we have these academic rotations in elementary, it's largely dependent on teachers rotating and figuring this out, or principals figuring it out. It's also dependent on staffing. And always there's a lack of staffing to do the really intensive small group instruction that we want to do. So this would give us a team that could meet our most intensive needs every day, 5 days a week. And they could see, up to 30 or 40 students a day and provide intensive small group intervention in reading and math. And so in the LLI curriculum, that looks like something, they recommend 4 to 5 days of 45 minutes. And the way we set up blocks in these rotations is, a K1 group, a 2-3 group, a 4-5 group, and they rotate in at different times of day and are able to work with this teacher. And we do tier it, so we have like intensive working with this teacher, we have benchmark working with some other teachers, we have strategic kids working with a different teacher depending on their needs, and we tier them. But this gives us a solid, intensive tier for student support that can happen every day. The only school where we really have something like this is at Antelope Creek. And you'll note in the data that they're one of our only schools that year over year we see increasing performance of students. It's because they have a dedicated intensive intervention. The one thing we know without doing improvement science, because the research is there, is that when kids get small group targeted instruction with research-based curriculum each day consistently, they make progress. And so our goal with this is to provide that at every single school. The learning loss teacher would also support data collection and analysis for teams and help them guide that placement of students in intervention. And then the other part of this is they would provide direct outreach to targeted students and families. So we'd want them to actually be having a list of students that we feel need additional support and directly reaching out and supporting those families. The aid support would also do some of that work. We also have, tiered intervention systems for social skills groups, and conflict management groups, and we want a person dedicated to just running those groups all day. So running those at recess and lunch and giving students that social emotional support they need. We have another piece of that that's Wellness Together. That's the counseling part, but this kind of trifecta lets us address a lot of needs in a concentrated way.
Sorry, I have questions.
All right.
All right. So this is great. I love this. A couple things though. To my earlier point, I don't want this come off in any way that we shouldn't do this. We absolutely should. I think this is fantastic. But if we do one FTE every year for 2 years and we pull them out because the one-time money's gone, what have we done to it? So making sure we're very purposeful and thoughtful about how we think about this in the out years when there's no money left to do that. It's going to be an important part of making it sustainable and making it work. The other thing is that we have disproportionate need at our schools, across our schools. So Antelope Creek is one, Rocklin L have more ELs, have more kids in poverty, and therefore, rather than having it 1.0 across, there is more money for kids in need in our system than kids who do. Can we think about even having more where the need is greater?
Yeah, so we actually thought about that. It's interesting. So 2 things. One, Title I schools will have more because this would not supplant their existing folks. So like Antelope Creek has this teacher. This would be a second teacher. And Rocklin Elementary School.
They have a 0.5, right?
No, Antelope Creek has a 1.
No, Rocklin L has a 0.5.
Yeah, Rocklin L has a 0.5. This would be in addition to that.
Right.
The other thing is if you think about size of schools, fortunately, our bigger schools are actually our higher performing schools. So our Sunset Ranch and Valley View, they're getting 1.0, but Cobblestone's also getting 1.0, and Rukla, and they only have 300 students. So the idea, their students will actually get more than the students at Sunset Ranch, and they should,
yeah.
because we know that works. But I am fully open to figuring out what people need. The only value I see in this, and we know this from our instructional coaching model, is having a teacher that belongs to your site,
Totally.
that knows your kids and teachers is powerful.
Totally.
And when you start to slice it up, there's something that's lost in terms of just the relationships and how that works.
Yeah, and to be clear, from my perspective, it would not be take them away, it would be add additional.
Okay. Okay, no, okay.
Right,
Absolutely, everyone gets one, and then can we do more where there's need is greater?
Okay.
Right, and we see the definite funding for next year, as we talked about, the bulk of, a good chunk of this has to go into, out of the learning loss into next year. Now, we have dollars to look to extend. This is also where, could we sustain these 3 folks at every school after? No, but we might find there's a section or for these types of students, and we proportion it out using supplemental Title I, Title II. So this is one of those pieces where we would love to have funding on the scale to do this, but as we move forward, we hopefully find some practices or pieces that work, and then we have to have those conversations around priority. This is such powerful work, so we want to prioritize, or we may have to scale down, but how do we target this
And
as
I
well?
do think, and I know Derek will agree, that to the extent that we can collect as much data as possible to understand the impact of this on our system, which is to say, we may get here in 3 years from now when the money goes away and say it was so successful, we actually want to take money from somewhere else and put it in here because that actually made a huge difference. And having that data to know that is going to be critically important when we have to make that hard decision in 3 years.
Absolutely.
Right, and again, we hope to extend this beyond, into
Or
2,
whatever
3
it
years.
is,
But
right,
I
right,
just,
right,
but this is where for, and this is the type of thing that frankly our schools have wanted to do. And we see this as building on the piece of Antelope Creek we've seen successful and having some MTSS pieces that we can work in a structure. And that's where, if we had none of those pieces in place, the scale up to this level would be, I think, much higher risk. But we feel that because we have those pieces, that this is something that just is adding capacity into a system that we have. And also, we hope that we can actually start this August 11th. This is not something that we say, well, let's get going, and then by Thanksgiving, we really do the work.
Yeah.
That's why we wanted to come to you tonight, because 4 months from, like, Friday or something, we'll be, back on, and we need to really hit the ground running.
No,
And to your point earlier, Trustee Miller, is I think this does allow us, even if it's short-term and maybe long-term, allows us to start addressing math and intervention. Because now we have some capacity to do both, where we really were tight before, so it's good.
you hit the point I was going to say, that I think these are actually interconnected. And I actually think pre-COVID, this would have been something I would have loved to have seen then. I mean, it's a model that's proven it's successful. I mean, Antelope Creek has been very successful with a similar model. Some other districts have something a little different, but somewhat similar. And I actually really appreciate this model, and I'd love to find a way that obviously we'll need to tweak it, and I know funding will be an issue down the road. But I actually believe this can solve many other problems that we might have, that it might actually free up funds in other spots. So I'd love to see us try that, and I'm super excited to hear an August implementation.
Yeah, that, and Superintendent Stock is right. With our current structures in elementary, we can put this in place immediately. It just fits in. So the other pieces,
Yes, just real quick, and building off it. So I know we talked a little bit about it, but be very curious and very interested in seeing how we measure the benefit. So again, going off of Rick's, so as we implement, and I think this ties into, I think also, as you were talking about before, like PLCs, I would assume that your learning loss teachers would have a PLC between them amongst other schools, so that if something's working here, we can leverage those benefits, and then overall, we're continuously improving on that, not just, hey, we're meeting the need here, but we're really hitting it out of the park there. So that one. And then hopefully that's a Zoom thing. I still love that idea, right? Then we don't have to put everyone in one room and all that stuff, so that would be ideal. And then two, just to verify, we will have the space, because it sounds like there's a classroom at every school that we're going to need to occupy and coordinate. So space isn't an issue?
And
If we have
thank
to
you for
use
the
stages, we'll use stages, you know?
and thank you for the transition, because the next slide, actually, we want to maintain the current coaches, but part of their role would be to coordinate what you're talking about, Trustee Counter, is training these learning loss teachers in the different intervention pieces and having meetings where they get to share out and kind of collaborate together and work together, because that will help with their learning, but also consistency across sites. So that would be part of the current instructional coach job, is supporting those teachers in the work they're doing at the school. We do want to add an additional math instructional coach to do the work we outlined earlier, which would be to help with these systems investigations, support math interventions at sites, help sites run these PDSA improvement cycles and kind of keep track of what's going on and help to scale this work. So that
That's
is a new
a
piece.
district coach, you're saying like a TOSA?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Right, so this would be an additional instructional coach position focused exclusively on math
In elementary.
at elementary. We also wanted to allocate some money for before and after school intervention and acceleration programs, both. So this is hourly for teachers to run clubs or run tier 3 interventions. And we know we'd have to consider busing as part of this for certain students, but we think it's important that we provide that third tier for students who need it, or even that acceleration piece. So we probably don't, I know we don't do enough for GATE and accelerated students who want to do more. And so offering those clubs and activities would be another piece. We talked about this earlier, but we want to look into purchasing a new social emotional learning curriculum that's going to better meet the needs of students and be more modern and be integrated into what teachers are doing in the classroom. We'd like to put together, we also like to have a universal screener for social emotional. You know, right now we have a screener for academics, and we would like to also do that as part of our tier 1 social emotional, so we understand where kids at and which ones actually need those interventions and maybe need that counseling or extra support. Some schools, based on our Wellness Together data, some schools need more hours, so and there's going to be a greater need. So based on the need of sites and where kids are at, we'd like to add additional counseling hours through Wellness Together to our elementary sites where it's needed. Some aren't using their current allocation, and so they don't need them, but some will. So we'd be planning on budgeting more of that, psychological support for students who needed it. And then there's several like supplemental web-based curriculums pieces that are assessment pieces or this alternate curriculum. So that the cool thing about these adaptive web-based curriculums is they can be a curriculum that's parallel to what the teacher's doing, and they can help target certain skills because they kind of self-adapt to where the students are at. And when teachers are doing small group instruction, I'm doing 30 minutes with this group is 30 minutes on this web-based application, and then we're rotating. So it allows for teachers to do some of that smaller group work.
We use more of that this year than we ever have. Teachers on their own using Khan Academy more unique. And is there any, and I know we're all busy, but is there any way to capture what we know seems to have worked and what teachers thought as a way to share across the district? There's a lot of good freeware out there.
It captures, they all have their own data systems, and the question is always like, how do those, because they usually show progress, right? But they would have to if you were a for-profit company, so I worry.
No. I mean, in other words, as a 8th grade math teacher, I use Khan, and I never used it before, distance learning. I use it now, and it really worked for me. And here's how I used it in context of CPM, and here's what and so having that information to share across could be very valuable, because again, more people use that than ever before.
I think that's a good conversation.
I totally agree with you. They will say that's great, for sure.
No, because we've been using Freckle this year,
Right.
ELA and math, and I know kids have been using it, and I look at the data for the district, and it shows growth, but I don't know. But I know it's useful in terms of targeting skills, and I know it's helpful in that way.
Right.
So I think it's worth having as for that means, but I think that's a good conversation.
Going back to leveraging the learnings, right? So
Right.
we learned a lot of great stuff with COVID. I mean, as bad as it was,
Right.
we learned how to do things differently. Like, if we can capture that somehow and hand that out so that as a teacher, I'm not starting from scratch.
Right.
I like that idea of collaboration. Okay. And then we have Ms. Barsdale here. I'm gonna let you take a turn.
All right, thank you.
I'll drink some water. This is a special education learning loss.
Yes. So in order to really support our students with disabilities, we're looking at also maintaining our instructional coach. So what we'd like our coach to focus on, specifically prioritizing new teachers and supporting our new teachers. We also have interns. This year we ended up with 6 interns. And so we want to make sure that they have support with instruction and curriculum and additional professional development, but then also just a lot of hands-on support in the classroom, just for environmental setup, classroom management. And then also we want to have them help work alongside the general ed instructional coaches to really be part of that math improvement. And so we want them to also be a part of like really making sure that we have good data, making sure that we can really look at progress for students, and kind of like what you were just talking about, being able to have some comparison data over time. We also are looking at having a psychologist
All right,
added.
Stacy,
Oh, go
this is
ahead.
all- so on that one, these are for, who are they for? Like these coaches, who would they be
So
supporting?
they're specific to special ed staff, but the classroom teachers. So they would be at sites depending on, like I said, we would.
So it's
prior-
not just SDC, they would be supporting everyone who touches, who
Yeah.
serves a special ed child would have access to these coaches.
Yeah, and it could be that they're supporting in a general ed classroom.
Right.
But with a student that has
Right.
an IEP, yeah.
Great, okay.
Yeah, depending on the needs. So we had a backlog of assessments this year that needed to be completed due to COVID and school closures last year. So we had a significant number of assessments this year, but we're also starting to get an increase in a request for assessments from teachers and parents, and not just for academics, but also for social emotional needs. So we're seeing a lot of really significant social emotional concerns for students. And so we want to add a psychologist to help support with that process. And then also we're looking at having a psychologist, someone with that background, as supporting with our legal cases. And part of it is just being able to make sure that we have good data, making sure that we have good assessments, making sure that we're really looking at the needs of the students and are those needs being addressed, and that so we can determine like what is the learning loss and what is the degree of learning loss, and then how do we need to address it. So someone who can kind of really help with the data collection on that.
This is great, and I know our psychologists are crazy overwhelmed right now, so I'm excited. So, but I want to understand how this works. So the idea then is we're going to go to our current classroom or school psychologist and actually removed some of the work from them, or this,
Yeah,
is this
okay, so
actually
the
trying to
first one,
clear their
yes.
plate a little bit, or just?
So the first position would be, yes, added support to our psychologist team.
So they can, on all the reports, all the crazy stuff they have to do, they can actually turn to this person or people?
Well, I think what I'd probably do is spread out the support across sites. So every psychologist has extra support
Yep.
at their site just for the additional assessments that they're going to have. And we're just projecting as what we're seeing now, that we're going to have more. One example, with preschool this year, we doubled our assessments. So I know a small portion of it
And
is
this
back.
fell on special ed in a way it never has before. It's
Yes, we
clearly
had 35
concerning
last
to our
year,
special ed
70, yeah.
teachers. So, and that was actually what I was wondering, like, is there any pre-K in particular, given the amount of stress that's put on the system, to any help there?
Yeah, so that's what we want to do, is help the current staff.
Awesome.
And it's been a hard year for everybody.
Right.
And so we're trying to avoid having that happen again next year.
Right.
So we're trying to think of as many ways as we can to really support our staff. But that would be one of the ways to support, just with the amount of assessments. We're also looking at other ways we support our SLPs, we support our OTs, our classroom teachers, so.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And then, so the psychologist on special assignment, I did talk about that a little bit. I don't know if you had a question on that part. We're also looking at having a behaviorist added, and so part of that, we're hoping that we can really consider the whole continuum of, you know, the MTSS tier model, and so that we're really looking at tier 2, how can we support the sites when students are starting to have those behavioral challenges? And we're thinking that they could help out with some of that support that the aides provide, but also maybe help us try to avoid the special ed referrals, and so that we're working at a lower level to intervene before it gets to the point that they need to be assessed. And we're also looking at ways that we can provide professional development to the teachers, but also to parents, and have other additional resources.
Do we currently have a behaviorist?
Yeah, so we have 2. We had 2 positions, but one has been unfilled for a year and a half. So that one just recently was filled in February. And then,
I want to add one more to the district level.
yeah, because,
These are all district positions, not
Yeah.
site, okay.
yeah, so the 2 we have are really specifically for special education, but we kind of want to have a little bit of a model so that we're helping intervene before they get to us to some level. So it could be like that tier 2, almost tier 3 student that's significant behaviors, kind of exploding out of the classroom, but they can maybe intervene before the referral happens.
Okay. Can I go
So
back
just trying
one?
to be proactive.
Can I go back one? I'm not at all doubting you. Just, can you explain to me the thinking on a psychologist when it sounds like what the job description is more legal?
Yeah, so what it would be is somebody, it's really specifically, like I said, kind of analyzing a lot of the information that comes across when we get a situation where there's, say, a disagreement, or a student, for some reason, the student isn't being successful, or that's perceived they're not being successful.
And is that backed
So-
up to a point, we don't have a lawsuit, right? But we're backing it up so that we're being proactive?
A little bit more proactive. So they would be kind of going in and looking at all the data. So not just like academic data, but previous assessments. What does it look like? Have we really assessed in all areas of need? Are the students getting the services that they need? And then how do we continue with that progress monitoring? And then helping determine at what level, there is some recovery services we need to provide, and making sure that we have a system for that.
So, and the other piece we talked about is the reminder that in Rocklin, in the last 2 years, we've had 31 legal cases.
Right.
So the good news is, and the rest of the SELPA, our bigger SELPA has 5 for comparison. So the good news is that we had 21 2 years ago, and we have 10 this year. And so we're really trying to get that number way down and get out from under kind of a rock. And so this person's gonna help us address that need.
Okay, thank you.
But just trying to Rochelle's point, also, as part of that, so I get the looking at data, and I get looking at data from a legal perspective, it makes a lot of sense, but in addition, will they not be removing some of the legal compliant work already sitting on our current psychologists, so they will have more time with
Yes.
kids to do their job, which is
Yeah.
what we, okay, great.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the biggest pieces of analysis of legal cases that Stacy does, her team, is looking at those reports, looking at areas, working
Right.
with teams so that we can, one, have good data, have good pieces, so when we do offers of faith, we work with families in a lot of ways. When it gets to a point where we're kind of really trying to work through, in any dispute resolution processes prior to filings and all that other legal stuff, that a lot of analysis of all that has to come in, and frankly, this really helps support that work and support those teams and take some of that burden off as well. Because we're seeing the increased requests for assessments, the increased requests for
Right.
other needs based on a COVID, we're trying to kind of, in a way, surge in support to work through this, we
Right.
anticipate, bubble. But we want to have it in place versus reacting. And so we see these as, 1-year pieces to help us surge through as we go. And also not diminishing the services currently provided. That's why we need to add this. Otherwise, what we frankly do is we meet the legal compliance and we don't serve the kids. Because
And is all this paid out of CARES or?
this
some-
is all coming out of one-time
So
funding.
again, we should, we should, but it's gonna go away.
And as the board is painfully aware, the board approved budget reductions that were required to help us be at the state minimum reserve prior to this one-time funding allowing. So,
No,
we are, if we had not received this one-time funding, we were just getting over the line to the minimum reserve with budget reductions that were made. And so,
To me, there's 2 different issues here, Roger. There's the structural deficit, which we've dealt with,
Right.
we're dealing with ongoing, and that is absolutely, but there's also the notion of setting up a system that's unsustainable by putting a lot of one-time dollars into needs that are beyond one-time needs. And how do we deal with that when the money runs out?
and candidly, that is the perplexing question for public education in the
Right.
state of California, is we get surges of one-time money. We saw it after the recession,
Right.
and then we saw it dry up. We see it now. And until we reform public funding of public education in this state to not have surges of one-time money, but ongoing dollars committed, we are in this feast and famine. And that is the hard part. By having the board focus, say, in math and areas, it helps us say, that's the priority. We build around that. And in this case, there has been a ton of conversation in the state around reforming special education funding, which is woefully inadequate. And we're seeing some progress in the pre-K, preschool area and ongoing budget. But I share your frustration that we are having unsustainable implementation next year. But we also have a higher need next year as well.
For sure. And so I guess what I'd say is it's not necessarily just a frustration. It's not going to get fixed. It's not. The state's not going to fix this. This is the system we have. So within that, what are we doing to respond to the system? And this worries me that this is a non-sustainable response to this moment in time, which could have even, like, the psychologist gets used to it. It's good. It's going well. And then you remove it from her. That has huge implications 3 years from now. So anyway, I have no better solution for you, but
We are hopefully anticipating some special education and early ed funding. So, and if that potentially came through federally,
from the feds, you mean?
there's potential there.
Yeah,
And
right.
it's not going to solve the problem, but it may give us some more time.
And at least
'cause I
helps
agree.
here, yeah.
And the other, and again, part of this is, surgeon piece, but it is the piece of, wow, I can do this, it's great. Oh, you mean I don't have this intervention help, or I don't have the psychologist? And that is frankly a worry of folks really feel that. And if you think about it, I'm sure as I talked to some teachers, it was like, wow, I really like those 12 kids in first grade. and I love my kids and I want them all together, but wow, now that there's 24, that's kind of busy, and I have to, and so that is, yeah.
My fear would be the buildup of a caseload that cannot be serviced. If we build up a caseload for this new psychologist or multiple people, then we have to remove them from the system. What do we do with those kids?
And so they won't be taking on a caseload necessarily. So the first position would just be, like I said, kind of added time at each site. So it'd just be kind of spread out. And so if it went away that next year, it's not going to be like a huge impact for every single psychologist. It will be some impact at each site. And then the second person will not be assigned, specific caseload, but they'll really be kind of supporting the whole district. So they won't have students necessarily assigned. So the last part is just looking at, really making sure that we have curriculum to address specifically the math improvement area, but also that we've really looked at what's the best supplemental curriculum that is really considered, evidence-based and best for our students. So we want to make sure we have like multi-sensory approaches, and that we've really looked at how do we address dyslexia, dysgraphia, and then also just the variety of our students' needs, that we're looking at students with specific learning disabilities, but also really evidence-based practices in our moderate severe programs. And some of the curriculum has already been in place this year. Since COVID happened, we've actually had an opportunity to have a lot of new things that have been tried, and we've really narrowed down some areas that the teachers have found have been really successful. And so those are the things that we want to continue this year, and continue to take data on and see if it's something long-term that we would want to use.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving because I want to create time for Marty, because I know that you'll have questions for secondary. So quickly, in terms of the following summer, and I'm going to give Superintendent Stock credit for this model, which I love this idea, which is we'll do summer school ESY, of course, but taking what we've learned in the PDSA cycles throughout this next year, we can start to train teachers or phase that in and have teachers doing training and then applying it in summer school in small groups and then coming back and debriefing. So it's almost like a mini instructional round summer model where we're serving students and training teachers on new strategies in math or ELA. And so there's more fleshing out of that to do, but I love that idea that we would be able to do both within that model and kind of get a twofer in there. And I think it's a good way to apply what we've learned throughout the school year. And then finally, to Trustee Miller's question about what carries forward. So, after all this money is used up or exhausted, what do we hope to carry forward? we're going to continue to carry forward the MTSS systems. I think we're going to learn a lot about the potential of them. You know, we heard maybe we find this is an amazing model, and it's just it's great for kids, and we have to make some other decisions about how we can sustain the model. We're going to create these common grade level assessments or course assessments in ELA and math. That carries forward. That gives us a solid data system where we can use that to group students and provide intervention. We'll have data systems in place. We'll have worked with our whole entire district on systemic improvement work in improvement science, this mentality that we're constantly improving, we're trying new things, we're scaling them. So that will carry forward. And then, again, that new learning about what can we provide for students and families in terms of targeted supports and what resources are necessary to address student learning needs. Nope, I'm not advancing. There we go. Okay, and that is elementary. Any final questions for this section?
I have a question, but I don't at all want it to come across offensively. As we put potentially, 3 trifecta people at each elementary, targeting math, which we all are agreeing it's important, and maybe I'm more concerned at the secondary level, do some of the teachers that teach other subjects feel like, hello, I'm drowning over here too, and I have had learning loss as well. It may not be as much as in math, or an ELA even, but there is learning loss across all subjects, right? So how do we address that? How do those teachers also feel supported? How are those students not forgotten in those other subjects?
That might be a question for Marty, because in elementary,
Either one.
we'll address ELA and math, which is central, and we'll have an impact on all teachers in classrooms. We'll be able to provide support. So that might be specific.
Yeah, when you think of some of those things and you hear of the skills, the essential skills.
Right.
So when you look at like history, some of those skills really, some of it is reading, problem solving, comprehension. So that does go across the curriculum. So although we're focusing on math and language arts, that also helps out in science and in social studies. But going back to the comment about, there's only so much, can we do it all? That's not sustainable, but can we focus on math and language arts right now? That is, and that will play out in those other subject areas.
Okay.
All right, I'm just going on the record to show that I have 30 minutes, but no. With that, I'll go through quickly, because I do, it was interesting, and when we addressed this, I reached out to the principals and we talked about this. They worked with their leadership teams and we built this together. And it was, as Bill and I started talking about it, very similar to what we see in elementary, we're seeing at the secondary level. A couple things I want to point out, though, is when we talk about learning loss and how do you measure it, what it is, and even though we have intervention set up and it's built into the schedule, please understand that intervention at the secondary level that we have built in is really focused on the current content. You heard Roger say prior that life-saving, to get through that integrated. But what we're looking at is really going back and filling those gaps. Because if you think of a high school teacher with 220 kids, they're focused on their curriculum at hand. But what we want to do is look at why did that kid fail that test in the first place? What skills are they lacking from, and one of the things I hear commonly, especially from our math, is a lot of our kids that move in from outside of our district struggle. So I hear that, but this is going to be an opportunity to really test, is that true? We'll be able to track that. So I want to make sure that you understand one of the things we're going to focus on is filling those holes or those gaps that these kids have. Another thing that principals really talked about is that human investment to demonstrate, in this gap, based on data, because that's an area that we've talked about before at the secondary level. We don't have a ton of data. We have some department level, site-based data, but looking at it from a school district, a unified district, do we have those common assessments? It's been quite challenging to get. So this is something that we could do. And then the focus, and I thought back to the parent-teacher meetings we did, for everyone from parents to teachers to even students, the need for that social emotional. So a lot of the focus moving forward here for the rest of the presentation will focus on that social emotional with that foundational skills to close this gap. Next slide, please. So I would like to say that, we're a unified school district, so we do it, but the reality is I learned a long time ago, beg, borrow, steal, and Bill did such a great job the way he put it together. I just stole his presentation. So with that, I did reach out and had a number of people, from administrators to counselors to psychologists to most of it came from our teachers. And as you look at this Wordle, you do see some words that you kind of would look at and think negative, the anxiety, apathetic. But then you look in there and you also see it's manageable, it's recoverable, because teachers had a different perspective of, did we truly see a learning loss at the secondary level? And so I just thought that was interesting. And once again, although we did it separately, some of the information we got back was very similar. Next slide, please. Academic, I just took some of these that people, and even though we just said summarize, I mean, some teachers spent a lot of time, and my spreadsheet was just pages and pages, but I just pulled out some of these things. More time for at-risk learners, focus on math and language arts, focus on those academic skills, the motivation of those lower performing students, because I will say, and research kind of shows, that gap we talked about, our student groups, our high achieving kids, they figured out a way to problem solve. They had some support, but it's those lower kids that didn't. So did that gap increase during this? That's the interesting part there. We have to plug those academic holes. We have to be responsive to student needs. We have to reacclimate them back to school. And that one on the bottom right, content is one thing, but when we talk about what is an importance, when you go in and you look like CTE, what do people want? They want people that can communicate, that can collaborate, that can problem solve. We've missed a lot of that because we've been doing this in a bubble at home. So, I'm sorry, if you can go back. The other one, and on the bottom left hand, even though it talks more social emotional support, I put this in there because this is a teacher that in their WASC report, even though 70% of the students claim they're experiencing anxiety and depression, within that department, they haven't seen a dramatic decline in ELA. So it kind of goes with academic, but it also mixed in there with that social emotional. Next, please, thank you. From a behavior, and in all honesty, there wasn't a lot of this because I think, Julie, you said it, behavior. I mean, I'm not sure if you're still in the honeymoon period, but you're back. But people really saw this, and that's where I think, Rick, you pointed it out, with the fact that we only missed 27 days and the fact that we were on an AM, PM. So now you have more time with those kids. I mean, I had some teachers say, this is great, like Roger was saying, the best teaching I've ever done, because now you could truly work instead of that. But the reality is, is that affordable? We're back to it, so we're going to make the best of it. But with that being said, there wasn't a lot, but some of the things I pulled out of here is the importance of building relationships, because they have been in those isolated bubbles. How do we work with those unmotivated kids? The one on the right there, the number one rule is to know something about each and every one of your kids. Again, I always, when I stress, I forget about it, but the kids don't know how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's really what it is. And I think that's when I was out and about yesterday, that was the excitement and the enthusiasm. I'm just so glad that I have my kids back, and it's some form of normalcy, because that's what teachers know. They don't know distance learning. They don't necessarily know AM/PM. They know how to teach school the way we've done it. So credit to all of you for making sure we're back. As far as the social emotional support, access to more services. We know, and the one thing that I've learned through this is when you look at anxiety and depression, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter race. It doesn't matter gender. It doesn't matter if you're a high-level successful kid. Now you have all the pressure of, I've only received half my AP class time, but I'm still taking that AP test. How am I going to do? Whereas on the opposite end of that spectrum, kids that don't necessarily have the support at home, they don't have the help, they don't have the social emotional or the academic help, so why should I even go to school? I know I'm not going to pass. I know I'm not going to be successful. When you look at this, though, the stresses of that, I like the one on the bottom right, stresses the importance of the person over the grades, okay? Yes, I know we're measured by grades, but again, the kids need to know that we care about them first before we try to achieve anything academically. So with that, moving forward, what are we doing? And what I'm proud to say is we've already actually started. if you look at this, one of the things about the 4x is we learned that first bullet, we had students that, once again, they took 4 classes, but they completed a year in what we traditionally call a semester. So those kids that weren't successful in some of those, especially the 12th graders and 11th graders, you have to pass English 4, you have to pass econ, economics to pass. If they weren't successful, we were able to re-enroll them, and we did that with a handful of kids. That second bullet, we've learned from that, and so what we're doing right now, we're currently in the process of doing this, is kids that didn't pass what would traditionally be third quarter, but in this 4x, it was the first semester of the spring year. If they didn't pass, we're able to get them back in, and we've used Edgenuity as one of these things because now they're going to have the opportunity to earn a year's worth of credit, literally in what traditionally would be a quarter. And we've been able to do that at Rocklin High School, and we're starting that at Whitney High School as well.
I'm sorry, I don't understand, because you said last week that it's likely we're going to go away from the 4x4. So how does this learning translate when we go back to what is our traditional schedule?
So once again, if you think about it again, they're completing a year's worth of credit. So they're earning 10 credits
Right,
in a semester.
right,
As we go back to the 8 classes, which, the plan is to do that, our MOU was very specific
Right,
that we'd
right.
go back. So now they earn 5 credits in a semester.
right.
So moving forward, again, you're still earning the same amount of credits, whereas you're taking 4 classes in the first half of the year, which is a year's worth of credit. The second half, you're taking 4 classes. So going back, I want to make sure I understand your question.
I guess what I see here is this notion of you can re-enroll. If it didn't work, you have another semester to sort of make it up. We can try it again, which is perfect for the 4x4. I don't see how it translates to the.
Yeah. You're correct.
Okay.
It doesn't translate
Okay,
that way.
okay.
That's why traditionally we've
Okay,
had
I
night
just
school
thought
and
it
summer
might- okay,
school.
yeah.
But just, we have the opportunity this year to
Got
make
it.
that work.
Sorry, yeah, got it.
Could that also be a summer school, a different variation though, an Edgenuity course for them to complete over the summer period from home?
Possibility. Last year we did summer school and it was all virtual. This year, we continue to use Edgenuity in summer school? We're just starting that process now, but that's definitely an opportunity that we can look at. Again, anytime we really look at summer school and night school, our focus is on our 11th, 12th grade. We want to make sure they maintain and graduate from their comprehensive site. So we're looking at the need because of the opportunity that the 4x4 presented. High schools right now, we're working on, do we need to offer night school? And that's available if we have to. But if they don't need that to graduate, can we just wait? Can we do it in the summer? And then obviously, with exception to our seniors, can they re-enroll next year? So those are all things we're working on right now. I will say that there's not a senior right now that hasn't been placed in the class that he or she needs to graduate. Now, whether or not they have to pass that class, and we'll continue down that road, but right now, everyone's been placed properly to make sure that they graduate in June.
One improvement cycle around this that I'd love to see in a small-scale pilot is the notion around actually extending that to kids short of A through G. So what if we took a few kids who were not going to graduate, they were going to graduate, but they were not going to graduate A through G, and we did the same intervention of a night school or a summer school to try to get them back on track to graduate, and whether or not that would work. Graduate A through G.
We could definitely go back and look at that. I will say that night school traditionally is not A through G because it's not credit recovery,
But could we?
but it could be, yes.
Yeah, right. And not this year. You got a lot to do, but.
Right, and that would be interesting for a junior or a senior in the fall semester before they apply to college. 'Cause
exactly,
once they've
exactly.
applied, the motivation's gone.
That's exactly
But
right.
there's a window of kids.
Yeah. So those are things that we're currently doing right now. Moving forward, all 6th through 11th grade students, what we'd like to do is have them complete a diagnostic in math and language arts this spring. That way we can use that data not only in summer school, but we can place them in intervention classes next year moving forward. So we want to make sure that we have this data, we get that baseline data. One of the ones that I've met with is IXL, and I know Stacy's using this in special education, and it showed great potential. This is just something that we've never had in secondary. And once again, I go back and I talk about, we don't necessarily have something in place right now where we fill the holes of all students. We're focused on the current content, but even kids that are successful, they still have gaps, they still have holes. Can we use this to identify those and to meet those? It doesn't mean that they have to be in a class for an entire quarter or a semester. They might be able to move in there and get that help in that one area and then move back out, back into an elective. So we're excited to start that work, and we'll be starting that soon, if approved. Looking forward to that. And then what's summer school going to look like? Again, we were transitioning away from summer school, but with COVID, we're going to bring it back, kind of a COVID summer school. I'm not sure what we're going to call it, but we're going to make that available. It's going to take place at Rocklin High School. And we're going to target, notice there, that we're targeting 6th through 11th grade students. Because if you recall back with Dr. Kathy Pond, we did a little jump start, but it was kind of a struggle to get kids to come in there and participate. We started and we called and we called and we called and we focused on Title I students, but what we ended up doing is, in order to try to fill the class, we ended up taking students that ended up 8th grade with a B in math. But we wanted to get them in there, kind of to get them on campus, to get them used to that transition. So this year we want to really target that, and that's where if we use this diagnostic, we can use that data, and I will give credit to Superintendent Stock, because originally I had on there 7 through. And he goes, well, why wait? Why don't we get them right now in 6? So again, our goal would be that we would start this summer, get them involved. We're going to target those EL, homeless, and foster youth and Title I students, similar to what Bill said about elementary. Students that hadn't met grade level standards on MAP, because we do MAP through 8th grade, but I'd also like to bring in IXL. And then ESY, where we will continue to do that with students with disabilities. And then the credit recovery for students, again, because we know COVID impacted students, we want to make sure we keep them on track to graduate. And then the size and scope of this is going to be contingent on staffing. And like Bill had mentioned, we're going to increase the pay of summer school. We really want our teachers in there doing it. In the past, we have had to hire subs outside. We realize teachers are tired, but we're actively recruiting. We're going to increase that pay, and hopefully we'll be able to get our teachers in there. Next slide, please. So again, looking at this, and as far as next year, very similar, and like I said, I Scouts Honor, we did this separately, but when we came back, it was very similar to what elementary was saying. Looking at the focus on ELA and math, and ELA, I also want you to think, it's not only the writing part, but it's also the reading part. We have programs at some of our schools right now focusing on reading. Believe it or not, we have a number of our kids that make it through our system, or they come in, and again, they're below in grade level reading. Even that freshman textbook is at high level, so that makes it challenging. And when you think about math and some of the stuff that was changed in math, kids have the ability to do the math, but they don't understand the reading part of it. So we want to focus on that. So we're looking at adding a learning loss teacher at the secondary sites along with that aid support. And again, looking at keeping these classes small, the ideal would be about 20 kids. 10 of these kids can be working on computer-based instruction, teachers working with small groups, or depending on the need, they might do some small direct instruction with 10, and then you have the aid in there as well, supporting that. So looking at that in both math and ELA. Also, with a focus on math instruction, moving forward with another coach. Again, this is in addition to the 2 that we already have, so bringing that on. Something else that secondary principals were pretty adamant about is we have mental health, and we're maxing out that mental health we have at our secondary sites. But in addition to that, we have a number of students we want to focus on: foster youth, homeless, social economic disadvantage, and then also truancy students. And again, truancy students, if you think you miss more than 10% of the school, so that's 18 days of school you're missing, and we have a number of those. Can we focus? Do we have the capacity to do that? Yes, we have a process in place right now with SARB, and that's, in all honesty, that's challenging, and it hasn't been very successful. That's a process where you send letters, you send letters, you send letters. Now we're going to take you to a county-wide hearing, and we're going to hear why you're not coming to school, but we can't wait until that. We have to get on this right now. Bringing these social workers on, we already have that list. The thing that bothers me about that list is it starts back at 0 each year. Well, if we've identified a student that's been chronically absent for for 2 or 3 years, but now because it's the beginning of the school year, they're going to get a fresh start. No, they're not. We want to hook them up with a social worker, and this social worker could focus on truancy kids going out there. What is the problem? Why are they not coming to school? Is it an issue at school? Is it an issue at home? So working home visits, going in, working with the parents. A lot of things, I will talk my past experience. I had a number of single-parent homes where the kid, even in 7th and 8th grade, is much larger. And so you have a single parent that has to wake up and go to work at 6 a.m., and they try to wake that kid up, but that kid just goes right back to sleep. Then all of a sudden they've missed the bus, or they don't want to walk, they don't go to school. And so having someone that can be on these kids and not only make sure they're coming to school, but make sure their basic needs are met. Having someone that could hook them up, because we actually do have quite a few programs in Placer County, but building this capacity to where we can support this kid and get them on the right path.
How many are you thinking?
District-wide, we're looking at 4. It'd be 1 at each high school, and then 1 at the middle school, and then also 1 to support elementary. Because this problem doesn't just start when they hit secondary. You know, as Bill can attest to, he can identify these. You know, this is kind of that rut that he talked about before that they fall into. And again, at the elementary level, it's not necessarily the kid's fault. You know, we also have to support the parents. What can we do to get these parents involved to help them get the kid to school on time?
And we're looking at 4, like half-time social work interns working with wellness together. So we would have, 4 different individuals that we would work with. And this is, again, versus us going out and hiring 4 social worker pieces, we would work with this. They would help do the supervision and some of the training. And so if you think about it, we have around 200 foster youth homeless district-wide. So huge focus there. And then obviously we have other students that we need to focus on as well. So the idea being that, if you think about that ratio, that we would look to try to support. And so this is definitely one of those pieces of, we may find that there's a sustainable need, great use of supplemental Title I type dollars for that, but also looking at, what do we learn? We've never had a social worker that I'm aware of in the history of the district, and I could be wrong, but, so I'm looking at colleagues that have, and so this is to see, does that type of differentiated support help us more?
I love it. I again have the same concern as we had earlier, and that is that we're looking for what are we going to learn from this time while we have these people? How can we, what can we learn from it that we will be able to sustain, right? I don't know the answers, but somebody will, as they dig deep. I mean, it's going to be a big burden relief for, we're going to be able to help counselors, we're going to be able to help kids, we're going to be able to, it's going to be huge. It's going to be hard to get rid of.
And I will build off that saying, I appreciate it, because this is a lot of hiring with one-time funds, and it's not a criticism, it's just a fact.
Yeah.
But this is where data is going to matter a lot. And where it's going to matter to, I think, all of us is not only did this work, did these social workers make a difference, but just as importantly, what's not working that I can stop doing? Because if I don't have both data sets, I don't know what I do with this, other than fire people at the end of 3 years that we only were wildly successful.
Right.
So starting now to develop the data, do we know how to make these hard decisions we're going to have to make in 3 years? It's going to be important.
And then absolutely, and then also the piece is, if we actually can improve truancy, ADA, they pay for themselves. Because if you think about it, we don't get paid on enrollment.
That would be great data to show us.
We get paid on attendance, not enrollment. And so if we can show this actually makes an improvement in attendance, there actually is a piece where it actually generates its own revenue.
And there's an interconnectedness with our LCAP, right? We just had conversations about LCAP, and a lot of the conversations were centered around these same pieces, and this could maybe be kind of a double dip there, that it serves that. I do have two thoughts, or really questions. I'm with you, Rick, on the data piece of, this sounds great, clearly a need. It's a hefty use of one-time funds on staffing, so I get a little nervous about that, but I see it meeting the need. I think it's beneficial if we're able to really see that data. And Bill, I don't know if this is you or Stacy, but I thought of could we pull out the data for those targeted groups? I know you sent us some and I looked through that, but I think that will help in this, as the data in the earlier presentation was phenomenal and helpful. But I would assume that that data looks very different for your specialized, these targeted groups that are going to really need these services, and that will affect our LCAP. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I didn't say it clearly at the beginning of the elementary, we know that targeted groups of students have learning loss, and it's probably severe. And so I actually do have that data, but it's very detailed, and I think it's linked to your agenda. But yeah, absolutely, we see a major issue there in
Okay.
both ELA and math.
And definitely not questioning it. I think that just helps validate some of these pieces, looking at those targeted groups. And then also just one other thought, it kind of goes, it's along with this, but goes back to the special education supports. A lot of those pieces too are very valid, important pieces that we need. I'm wondering if there's differentiated need elementary versus secondary. As far as support to those in the classroom, support to those students. A lot of the pieces we're identifying here at the district level, which are necessary and needed, but part of me wonders too, kind of boots on the ground in the classroom, helping, whether it be professional development, support in the classroom with those students, elementary versus secondary. Has that been given thought?
Yeah, so there are very different needs at the secondary versus elementary level, but also between like moderate, severe, and mild, moderate, or mild, moderate needs. So yeah, we have looked at that. Specifically, there is a huge need at secondary for math curriculum specific to special education. So we want to really target that. Elementary seems to have more resources. What we've really focused on this year is getting a lot of data collection K-12. So what Bill and Marty had talked about is we used IXL district-wide so that we could get some good data this year. And so we'll be able to use that data to really kind of help us make decisions for next year, so that we can really focus on what are the needs at elementary, middle, and high school. So what we'll do this summer is take that data from all of our targeted groups, and then we'll use it during the summer to get some good information as far as like specific progress, and then kind of help plan for next year as well. So yeah, we are looking at all levels, but also the diversity of the students.
Great, and that's what I was getting at, that moderate to severe too. I think there could be supports given to those teachers that might actually solve a lot of these pieces.
Yeah.
That we won't need all those other pieces, when really it's that support and maybe additional training.
Yeah, and the thing that we have to look at is not just like math and learning loss and academics, but we also have to look at like, what is the regression in the areas of behavior and the areas of just social emotional and social skills in general. And so that's where we bring in like best practices and what can we do for all of our programs to really look at the whole environment, not just one specific area, but all areas.
Thank you.
Marty, before you roll on, I wonder too, I was thinking about what Tiffany sort of said about do you have what you need, and Roger's very quick answer, you don't. But as I look through all this, there's also the difference between investing in this and implementing it well is a big gap, right? And so wondering about your ability to actually do this and do this well. So like with the one-time funding, I even think like, should we think about hiring someone to evaluate, to help us understand, to look at the data, to assess it and understand? I also think like something like math instructional coaches, it makes all the sense in the world. I completely agree with it. But how do I say this nicely? Secondary math teachers may be less interested in hearing from a coach than primary, right? And so given that, we know that. So just hiring someone doesn't mean we're going to have an effective intervention. So how do we think about hiring in a way that actually works for our math faculty? And that takes time and energy and work. And so are we also investing in ourselves to make sure we have the capacity to implement all this well?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because as Roger alluded to, I don't know about Bill, but we're tired.
Right.
So looking at that, but again, this is where it is interwoven in the fact that since math is going to be a focus, and you are exactly right. Math teachers at secondary level, they're very proud. They work extremely hard, almost to the point where they get a little defensive. But if we hire that coach, again, can that focus be at middle school? Can that coach help with that transition between 6th and 7th Something else we have to look at is, as I mentioned earlier, integrated one's actually taught at 4 different sites.
Right.
Can it just be that focus for that 1 year as we build this out?
Yeah.
So,
And the other piece is I've never been shy in the 8 years I've been here about constantly reorganizing the district to achieve the goals that we set. And so I will, as we work through this, be bringing some thoughts on some reorganization pieces to support the work systemically, because there will need to be to achieve this. And so I'll be developing and sharing those.
So I appreciate that, but I think also what you're hearing is, and I know you know this, is that like unprecedented. We've never gotten this much money one time at one moment. It's never ever happened in the history of Rocklin or public education. And so thinking of that differently and responding differently is going to be an important part of how we develop this and put it through.
Right, and I'm very intrigued about the idea you mentioned around, okay, if we know that a gap in our system is data systems, but also frankly, we don't have an evaluation component in our district. And I've had the opportunity to work in 60 and 40,000 kid districts, and there are departments and they do that. We don't, and we're just not as big to sustain a position. However, given the intense interest in finding and tracking the data, there may be an intriguing piece of if we partner with an outside group with one-time funds to help us.
$100,000 to check on 7 million seems
Right.
like a good investment,
Yeah,
right?
measure some pieces, because if we go to try to hire, develop all that, we lose a leg piece, but there are organizations around PACE, West Ed, pick any number that this is what they do, and it may be worth in partnering to get that information that helps us inform big decisions down the road. So those are that's a thought as well. And we've done a little bit of that in the past, but there's a lot of good folks that we can think about working with, and they can help us figure out even the right questions to ask, because that's part of what they do is, help figure out the questions we want to ask. So that's we'll look at that as well.
no, I much appreciated. So to finish up here, you see, again, a lot of similarities, intervention, extra hours. One of the things we talked about, though, is as those of you that have high school kids, they don't always do their homework at 3:30. So can we have something, taking advantage of Zoom, can we have someone on call to where, if I have a science question or if I have a math question, is there someone I could reach out to through Zoom to do a one-on-one? So getting creative there. Again, that supplemental web-based diagnostic. The thing I like about IXL is it actually aligns to California standards. It actually aligns to our curriculum we have, Springboard, and to CPM. It also aligns to our MAP data that we have in 7th and 8th grade. Just to move through quickly, social emotional curriculum, we know we need to do that. My thinking is let's get some, and if we can buy something and build that, so every 7th grader gets this lesson, every 8th grader, and we put that in Schoology, and so we don't overlap by grades, but we build that, and that's something that we can use one-time funds, make that sustainable to where we have our own curriculum moving forward. Also, parent education classes. That's one of the things we talked about in the PTC meetings, and parents were interested in that. So I think that's important too. We reach out to parents to find out what is it exactly you want. And I could say from just some of the parents I've talked to, I have a highly successful kid that's crying every night because of the stress. And I've had parents say, I don't put stress on them, but kids, whether it's to keep up with the Joneses or just the pressure to go to school. I know when my kids were going through, kids were embarrassed to say that they're going to Sierra College. Instead of saying, I'm going to college, well, in Rocklin, going to Sierra College is not good enough, and it's embarrassing. And that's one of those things, I know I'm a product of Sierra College. I think Superintendent Stock went to junior college. Again,
I'm Joaquin Delta.
going to college is the goal, and you shouldn't be embarrassed by that. But we have to make sure parents understand that. And then finally, curriculum camps for that collaboration and that professional development. Moving along quickly, addressing, once again, as we talked about summer school, summer next year, looking at this, and Rick, I appreciate the fact that you brought that up because that's a concern of mine as well. But we have to look at that, what data and what is successful. And then we're going to have to make some decisions and some priorities. Because if we do try these things and we show that, oh my gosh, they're making great progress, we have to figure out a way to sustain that. Looking again at that IXL, continue to offer extended school year and credit recovery. that jump start for middle school students, if this data demonstrates that that was successful and helped them be successful in middle school and then again in high school, that's great. And then similar to what Bill already presented, using that kind of that blended teacher learning student intervention during the summer school where teachers work together, they go out and teach that lesson study, they learn from that, what worked, what didn't work, and then we could do this over the course of 3 weeks and get different teachers in there so everyone gets a little taste, but they're not giving up their whole summer. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. And then finally, the beyond, really it's as we've already talked about, continue. You know, do we have a data system? Is it working? Where are we at with our math improvement? Where are we at with our common course assessments? Our MTS intervention systems? And then what did we provide out there that supported families and students? And how can we sustain that to continue to be successful? Questions?
Do we have some data systems that we're looking at, or is this a complete unknown?
Right now, we're in the process of looking at a system called Videri.
Videri, yep.
What's it called?
It's called Videri. And they're working, our IT department and their IT department is getting that. So hopefully we're going to have that up and running relatively, within the next week or so.
We're getting close. Awesome. It's been a long road,
It's
but we think
it's been a challenge.
We think it's got to sync with our Aries system, and they haven't been speaking the same language, but they're getting there.
Because and the reason why that's critical is if we want to disaggregate the data by different student pieces, we have to have it talk to Aries because that's where that's stored for us. And so when we don't, we have to literally do it by hand, and that's unrealistic to make it useful to school, to classroom, and for us to do queries of, like questions you all were asking, which were great. So that's one of those pieces that we started to get into this, and we just found, it'll take us 8 weeks to get back to you, and that's like unacceptable in this day and age. So.
But also for teacher use, because the same thing applies, because we do have our PLCs and they do this, but they're doing it by hand, and that just, again, speaking to a teacher, that's why that's not sustainable.
Right.
You can do it for maybe 1 or 2 units, but to try to get something to where if we can take that out of our grade book and just input it, and then you can look at it, disaggregate it, it's going to be much more helpful and useful.
Okay, awesome. And in connection with that, how about the common assessments? Is there stuff on the table? Do we have ideas on that, or?
Common assessments, I'll say that we have them at individual sites. It's getting that common assessment, and we've worked on this over the years and to keep that sustained. Once again, my goal would be that as we look at this here, and I don't want teachers to freak out thinking I'm gonna get lockstep, but my goal would be that we have an end of the semester common assessment and integrated one, and let's start there. And then we can build from that. And again, not only in math and language arts, but my goal would be that we continue to do that in all those core subject areas, because as it's been said throughout the night, if someone's really rocking it, then let's figure out what's working. And let's work on building that guaranteed viable curriculum for all kids to be successful.
And they could do that, right? They could build that assessment together. I mean, that's going to help with the buy-in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, we're not.
Right. It's not like we're saying here, this has to be it. We're
I don't
saying
tell
we
them
work together on it.
Right.
How or what. They're the experts. They're the
Right.
ones doing it.
Right.
And I trust them. Last thing I'm ever going to do is tell a math teacher what to do.
Right.
And frankly, we want to have, those best practices across classrooms and reduce any variability of what goes on room to room, place to place, is it gives teachers a basis of data to talk about common practices that help students achieve. So we see this as another means to a goal that there's been conversation around that too. And frankly, teachers want to know. They're curious. And so we feel this can help as well in that goal.
And Trustee Hupp, in elementary, we're actually fairly close. We have a draft, a universal screener for math. And it's really just meeting with grade level teams to finalize. I think the furthest we are is 6th grade, so we've got some work to do there. But I think by second semester next year, we could implement actually and start putting data into those systems.
So is it written or digital?
We currently house this in a spreadsheet, and teachers input all their data into a spreadsheet. We're hoping to transition that into Videri, because it takes work. I mean, we input data, they look, they make a decision on the data, and our coaches have helped with that a lot in elementary in terms of managing that and helping teachers, and in some cases actually putting in their data to help them, but we really want to streamline that.
I will say, Mark, it does seem to me, given one thing we know for a fact, I think we know for a fact, as much as we can, is that we are going to, this year, do some common assessment at the secondary level in math and ELA. It appears clear the state and feds are saying, you have to do something.
Sure.
I don't know what that is. So whether that's but so is this a moment in time for us to think not SBAC, but actually to move some sort of a map or some common assessment secretary, since we're going to have to do it anyway, let's do it in a way that advantages us in the long run.
Sure. Again, that's why I started tonight saying this is an opportunity to move forward, and that's our goal, is looking to move forward. What can we do to work together as a unified school district?
And again, I hope the board sees too is we're really working with that goal the board set to build coherence within the whole system and structure around this, and versus having a lot of different unrelated pieces. And that's, really the benefit of the board, giving us that direction early on. And as we shared, it's taken us months in a sense to reorientate, to make sure we have resources planned, but that allows us to start this summer, this fall, by moving forward. And that's why we were very anxious to bring to you this thinking, even at the point of exhaustion of colleagues, of reopening and then this, because we really need to start going right away, because the time is ticking. Because we don't want to say, well, we'll take the summer off, or we'll get started next fall, which means Thanksgiving, Christmas we implement. We want a full year of working with our kids, and we want to begin that. And frankly, to even sustain the math work you heard, we're going to need these additional resources to help leverage and manage that and work through it. So, we will, as you can see, bring forward a formal plan to you that has to be adopted by the board. We plan to bring that on May. This was an opportunity for us to share our thinking, hear your input, make sure the required plan is very broad, is how we have to provide that, which is great, because we will be flexible and change and adapt as we go through. And then, we're going to be continuing to gather input from through our LCAP process. We have stakeholder advisory groups, families, staff, that we'll be working with and presenting some of this with them. And then we are in the midst of planning and implementing as we go through this. So, very excited about that.
Thank you for all of your work. Really appreciate it, and your leadership leading them through this. This is going to be awesome, and really, we have a lot of good problems to have compared to what we have had, right? I mean, we are going to have some challenges. This is going to be as different as COVID was. Okay, now you have millions of dollars, and how are you going to use it, and what's the best way to use it? But that is a good problem to have. So I really appreciate your efforts. I especially appreciate the voices from the classroom and the site. That's where we get the best information. And some of the things that I just meant to comment earlier on the socio-emotional and the behavioral are things that we really knew. But when we have a pause like this that is unprecedented, that we had never experienced, I saw it in my own life, I'm sure you guys did as well, that things like connecting with kids and making eye contact and knowing, one thing about each student, those things we know, right? But it was a good time to pause and to really focus on the things that are really important. So I'm really excited about some of those things I think that'll come out of this as well. So thank you.
Yeah, again, I thank you for all of this. I get, bring a school back up from let's see, we went from distance learning to hybrid to AM, PM, and all the way back, and that's amazing. And then to put all this stuff on top of it, again, with the workload, again, thank you. I appreciate the continuous improvement mindset, and I think that's the right thing for our district in the long term, and small incremental pieces, it will only have benefits and generate benefits long term, so I think it's the right mindset we're doing. Hopefully we can leverage some COVID learnings, as bad as it was, the little things that we did in all these different classes and at different schools at different times. If there's some benefits, jump on those. I agree with everyone here that the challenge we have is we're going to create unsustainable programs with one-time money, and how do we, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, how do we continue those benefits? So I know that's a challenge. I also see, as Rick was mentioning, the leadership capacity. So we're going to, again, with all this additional, we're going to hire, we're going to train, we're going to have to supervise, we're going to review all these different people, programs, and then they walk away. So hopefully a data system, some kind of way of using that long-term comes into play. And then I can't remember who said it, so I apologize if I don't mention your name. Whatever we can do to remove some of the things, again, with all the people and the knowledge, if there's things that we're currently doing that we can pull out of the equation to just take work off of people going forward, like, I think that will only help us down the road. And every program, is great, and every program has an intent, but going forward, if it's kind of lived its life or we don't need it as much anymore, can we pull those off the table so that we can free up resources and people and time to do good things? So hopefully. So again, thank you.
I
This is
agree, and
amazing.
sometimes, and maybe as we bring in some new people and new perspectives, they will see things that, hey, this, you guys were doing this, and you kind of had your blinders onto it, and it wasn't actually serving you well. And so what are some things that we can do, differently that maybe some new perspective will help us see as well?
I just want to say ditto to both, Rochelle. I thank you very, very much. It was amazing. It was really great work, and I deeply appreciate it.
I echo their sentiments of thank you. This is no easy task. This was 3 hours of really important information to look at, and I really appreciate the data and what you sent beforehand. I think that's helpful. And I think this is important work not only for our current students, but our 700 to 800 students that are coming back in the fall. We have a journey ahead of us, and I know I don't end a single meeting without throwing that in there because I'm believing it and I'm fighting for it. But I believe Rocklin is the best, and Rocklin does everything with excellence. And so I think also, I echo a little bit, Rochelle, of what you said, as we are listening and hearing and talking with our teachers, I think that's critical as we have these students return back. Not knowing where they were, not knowing where they went, the experiences they had or didn't have, that will take some adjustment in the fall. And so I'm sure we have already thought through that. But I think the fall, that might need to be a priority a little bit in the beginning of how do we assess those students quickly. And I know I don't expect you to answer on the spot, but I would love for us to be able to identify August, September as those students return, how we're going to assess them and then address their needs, than waiting until the end of a semester or a year, because then they're possibly 1, 2, 2.5 years away removed from us in our learning structure. But thank you very much. I know that's no easy task, but I think this creates a framework to do that in the fall, so thank you.
I want to also echo the thank yous and acknowledge that you've been doing all this under extreme pressure and strain and anxiety, and not just your own, but that of the hundreds of teachers that you work with every day. And I know that gets put on your shoulders a lot, and that makes your job a lot harder. So thank you for doing that, and you guys have done a spectacular job.
Thank you. I agree. We have a great district. And again, this has just provided us an opportunity to grow with everything people were forced in to learn. A number of colleagues out there I talked to would have never thought that they were going to be doing what they're doing, but they were forced to learn it. And just a shout out to all of our teachers, all of our staff. They really stepped up. And again, to only miss 27 days when other school districts aren't even back yet says a lot about Rocklin. And again, thank you for your leadership for making sure that happened. So.
So, Ryan, are there any Zoom written or public comments? I didn't see any written when I checked, but.
President Counter, there are no public comments.
All right. So, yeah. So, at this point, we'll adjourn to a closed session, but I have to ask, before we do that, are there any public comments before we adjourn to a closed session?
No public. President
All right.
Counter, there are no board
right.
public comments.
So the board will now adjourn to a closed session regarding the items listed on the agenda.